What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Art of War. We have a super exciting video for you today as we are doing the faction tier list for every single army in the game of Warhammer, and we're going to be ranking them from the most competitive to least competitive, which are the top armies, which ones have gone down based on the latest September balanced Dataslate and MFM. This is the time for rankings, and as always, this is a discussion point. This is for us to put out what we think, what our opinions are on what the state of the meta is going to look like, but of course, we're not perfect. We can make mistakes. We want you to disagree with us. We want you to agree with us if you do, and let us know in the comments below. As well, if you are joining us and you enjoy our tier list, you love having the edited videos that we've been putting out, please do give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell your friends about us. All of that massively helps us grow the channel, and we love to hear your feedback. Now, if you want to see more content from all the different armies in the game, check out The Worm at theworm.vhx.tv. There's a 3-day free trial, and on top of it, you get access to our international Discord community. This is the best time to be joining The Worm right now as the meta is wide open. There's a lot to learn, and we are releasing State of the Factions for the most changed armies right now. So best time to join and see what the discussion is surrounding your favorite army.
Absolutely. We are extremely excited. Every time there's a big update to Warhammer 40,000, we love to talk about it. So stay tuned. We've got so much content coming in The Worm. We've got a couple games already came out. We've got more games coming. We're really excited for this one. And of course, we just love talking about Warhammer. We love making
You love it too. You love it too.
We're really excited for this one. So ranking every army in the game here. Pretty hyped.
Yep.
Let's, do we want to maybe define, so we just have 5 letters that we're ranking with here. We're going S, A, B, C, D. We want to kind of put a little bit of a definition on like how we're ranking these and what these tiers mean.
Yeah, so for me personally, S tier is an army that's kind of outside the scope of what normal 40k should be. There can be very good armies in 40k. That's awesome. We love to have good armies. But this is an army that's too good. It either has fun rules that break the fundamentals of the game, or they have data sheets that are severely undercosted for how they perform. There's several things about this army that are too strong overall.
Yeah. Now, there's usually not too many of these, luckily. But an example would have been Death Guard a couple months ago was a clear definition of an S-tier army. And the hallmarks of an S-tier army is that they are usually a high percentage representation in the meta. So if you look at stats, how many people are playing Death Guard? More than other armies. How are they doing with them? Better than average? How many tournaments are they winning? More than they should be. That's an S-tier army. And you can usually see it very cleanly.
Absolutely.
When an army is S-tier, it's like, this is problematically good.
Yeah, now this is at the beginning of the meta, so this is partially predictive on our part, but how are we going to kind of take this faction and move them a couple of months from now and see, is this going to be a consistent perennial event winner, more so than basically every other army?
Now, next is A tier, of course. A tier is the armies that are solidly above average. We think that these armies are very capable of winning tournaments. They're capable of doing well. We're expecting them to have, at least a reasonable win rate. But these armies are not, no matter who plays them, they wreck you.
Absolutely. You have a game of Warhammer into them. Some armies are going to be better into them than others. Of course, different matchups change depending on what armies are involved. But if you're a skilled player, you're going into this army and you at least know that it's going to be in your meta, so you're not completely unaware, you should be able to perform a game. You might not win, but you're going to be able to put up a fight.
Yep. B tier, well, that's the middle. And these are normal, perfectly fair armies. They are playing Warhammer. Of course, still certainly an army that is capable of winning a tournament. It's a kind of army where when it wins a super major, you like raise an eyebrow and you're like, oh, I wonder what he's doing different. Wonder what they're doing. How did she get there? And it's interesting when it happens, but it's not out of the question.
Yeah, whereas armies in A tier are going to have multiple advantages, often against the armies below them. These are the type of armies where they don't necessarily have any inherent advantages. It's mostly going to rely on your player skill pulling off, important and game-winning plays against a quote-unquote better army, an army with more tools, or an army that happens to have more units than they probably should, stuff like that.
Absolutely. C tier's up next. I mean, you can kind of guess where we're going with this, right? C tier is those armies that we feel are disadvantaged in a competitive game. We feel like they are the ones that we would want to see a little bit of buffs to, the ones that we think are going to really struggle to win tournaments. Now, the wonderful part about Modern 40k is that we think the difference between A tier and C tier is not nearly as wide as it was a few editions ago. And so I expect to see the C tier factions win some events, but I don't expect them to win many, and I don't expect them to win large ones.
Yeah, the advantages that the faction has are completely outweighed by the disadvantage into the better armies in the meta.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, D tier. D tier is a rough place to find yourself.
Yep.
You don't want to.
There's usually not many, not since the early days of
not
edition.
always any.
Mm-hmm.
But D tier is we have a very low opinion of this faction. We don't respect it. We don't rate it. We don't think it's real.
Yeah, you can bring it to an event, but my God, the disadvantages are basically right in your face.
They're very difficult to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what criteria do we think we want to use when we're evaluating these factions? Now, there's always the two sides of the coin with Warhammer, where you have teams versus singles. And as Teams 40K has emerged as a much more popular way to play the game, much more in the public eye, it is a real consideration. Is this better in teams, better in singles? I think with this tier list, we normally keep an eye on teams, but I think we lean a little more towards favoring singles is usually how this goes.
Yeah, singles is by far the most popular way to play Warhammer competitively, and so we're definitely going to lean more towards, does this army in a singles environment have the tools to be able to succeed consistently? And that's going to be our main criteria. Does it have the tools that allow a skilled player, an experienced player with that faction to consistently outplay other armies around the same level and possibly above them?
And then finally, the criteria we're using here. So this one's always tricky. This is the part that no one is going to listen to because they never do. So the way that we like to evaluate the armies usually is that we're ranking them at their max potential. And so if I were to say rank Emperor's Children, I would rank Emperor's Children off of one of the best Emperor's Children players in the world is playing the best list of the faction. So I'm not ranking Rapid Evisceration played at your local game store. I'm ranking, a great Emperor's Children player, like Alexandre Sacco from France, playing Emperor's Children, playing Coterie.
Yep.
Good list that he's practiced on. That's what I'm ranking right now. And so if an army is inherently harder to play, we usually rank it a little bit higher than maybe stats would suggest, because usually a good army that's hard to play doesn't have a great win rate. But if we think that a great player is playing who can overcome the fact that it's difficult to play and can get the most out of the faction, that's what we're ranking. Someone who knows it is getting the most out of it.
So out there are some stats related to like ELO and veteran win rates and such, and we're really leaning towards that type of criteria for judging these armies. Doesn't mean that these rankings are not going to be, applicable to you. It should still give you an overall picture of the meta that's very informative of where the factions lie.
Mm-hmm.
But it also shows you, maybe you are a player of an army that we rank a little bit lower, but you're having great success. It does mean for you that you're actually finding ways to outplay people in your meta, which is a very good compliment.
And it is.
Objective markers are essential to every game of Warhammer 40k, so why not try out the latest in objective marker technology for your own games? These objectives are significantly thinner than the neoprene markers you see at your local game store and tournaments, so it's very easy to put them under ruins and models. They feature minimalist and clear designs so that they blend into your existing terrain and mats. Functional, while removing the visual clutter to make your battlefields more immersive. The objective markers ship from the United Kingdom to the EU, US, and Australia. What are you waiting for? Try them out now.
All right, so are we ready to rock and roll into the first one?
Let's go ahead and start. We're going to be going through alphabetical through the different armies. We're going to start off with the Adeptus Sororitas.
So, Sisters of Battle, they've been kind of like slowly creeping up from the hammer blow they got last fall.
Boom!
I think it was like the December balanced Dataslate was the one that hit them pretty hard.
Huge.
And then they've been slowly creeping up since then. They got another wave of buffs. Another couple things got cheaper. Retributors got a rules call out that makes them better. And I think they're in a perfectly solid place right now.
Yeah, they have multiple playstyles. They have the 30 Sacrosands with the Hospitaller, kind of playing a Necron style, healing back models, threatening to just control objectives. Then they have a more Bringers of Flame, very fast, gun-oriented approach. And then they have a kind of middle-of-the-way Hollowed Martyrs approach where you're trying to stand back up characters and play a nice, even trading game. And all those are viable, all those are competitive, and they've been getting increasingly more popular among the Sisters players as people have gravitated back towards the faction. It wasn't necessarily that Sisters were completely one of the worst armies in the game after the nerfs. They weren't one of the best, but there was also huge faction abandonment. And when you abandon a faction, even if there are other new ways to play it, those ways are less explored. and it takes longer to regain the confidence in the faction.
Yeah. But right now we're seeing that most of the Sisters players who are sticking around are the dedicated faction experts who are willing to dive deep for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Sisters are solidly good. I think that B tier is probably most appropriate here, but probably going to end up in the upper end of B tier, I would say. It feels like it's on the verge of A, but I think that I'm just willing to say this is an average to slightly above average army.
Yeah.
Not a crazy one.
They have above average durability. They've got often above average speed. They've got solid to above average shooting. Mm-hmm. But they don't really excel in any one category where you're like, wow, Aeldari speed, insane, or the damage output of, this Death Guard army when people are close. They don't quite have that wow factor as much anymore after the nerfs, besides kind of all. And so I think they fit perfectly in that B tier where they have some advantages, but they often don't have enough of them against a particular faction that they're mainly relying on player skill to take them over. And I think when you're relying mostly on player skill rather than advantages inherent to your rules, in addition to player skill, you're probably more of a B tier army.
I think so. I think that's a fair place to put them.
Next up, we have the Adeptus Custodes, and these Adeptus Custodes didn't receive too much in the latest balanced data slate. They've been sitting kind of middle of the pack for a while. Nothing impressive really specifically about the army. They do have Caladius Grav tanks. They do have Wardens, but overall, they don't have anything really special. Lions of the Emperor was a nice detachment add, but ultimately it hasn't really found its way towards the top of the meta. They've kind of been middling for a lot of the last couple months. The meta around them has been quite hostile to elite infantry bodies, especially 3-wound bodies, and so they haven't really found a way to gain advantages. There's nothing that I look at with Custodes and I say, okay, here's the leg up that this faction has into the better armies in the game. They've gotten some datasheet upgrades in terms of their bikes, the Dawn Eagle jet bikes, and they've also received a decent amount of points decreases. But I've yet to really see what they have shine in a way that would put them above the middle of the pack.
It's crazy to see it, but Custodes have really lost their luster. It's nothing, it seems, has moved the needle, where a new detachment kind of kept them even. A bunch of data slate changes have changed, the bikes, the Terminators, the points cost. But it feels like everything that has changed for Custodes has been I guess I could run one unit of that instead of this other unit, where the last piece of the puzzle after you take your Warden squads and your support tanks, the last piece of the puzzle, the one unit you get to fit, that has moved around a little bit. But I have to take another unit, it'll be a guard squad. It'll be an Alora squad. This 3 months, it'll be a bike squad. Nothing has fundamentally changed the faction.
Yeah.
And the meta has moved around them, and as the meta creeps forward and Custodes stay still, they just feel like they fell behind a little bit, and Vigilators and just regular Custodian Guard got cheaper by a little bit, but not so much that you build around it. It's that, now I have 20 extra points, I'll add an enhancement.
Yeah. Cool. When I look at Custodes, it's a primarily combat-oriented army. When I look at combat armies, I'm looking for fight first. I'm looking for minus damage. I'm looking for various ways to get a leg up, full fight on death as well. And when I, look at these Custode data sheets, they don't quite have the tech to make sure, they don't have the extra speed. They can do advance and charge, but it's not insanely fast. They mostly have to rapid ingress into the middle of the table, then attack from there. They don't have much fly keyword for a combat army, so they can't get past screens as easily as other armies. And when I see those downsides, they allow the opponent to find ways to delay them, to outplay them, more so than some of the best combat armies.
Very much so. And so for me, I see them in C tier. I think Custodes tier is the answer on this one, unfortunately. It just feels like none of the changes that have been made recently have been impactful. Giving them Lions kept them afloat, but it didn't raise the level. And it kept them afloat while the meta kept rising. And then they got passed again, and nothing since then has really changed my perception of Custodes. So
yeah.
For me, this is like a middle of C tier army. It's not the worst army in the game. It's not pretending to be. But this is just a case of it's very hard to justify taking into a tournament that you're actively trying to win.
Yeah.
You got to really outplay some people to get there.
Its limited tool set in only having a handful of really good data sheets restricts what you can possibly do as a good pilot as well.
So after Adeptus Custodes comes Adeptus Mechanicus.
The Adeptus Mechanicus received some very significant changes in the September balanced dataslate. Call is basically a new model with significant upgrades across his datasheet in terms of damage and support for the army. In addition, many different datasheets received additional damage output in different ways, like the Onager, the Iron Striders, Ruststalkers, Infiltrators. And so AdMech as a whole gained some amount of points if you take Call, as well as Iron Striders, but outside of that, almost everything is just free upgrades to an army that was looking for damage in as many places as they could try and reach. Previously, one of AdMech's biggest weaknesses was not the amount of stuff you had on the table, it was not the amount of speed or the ability to move block people. AdMech does that great. They control objectives, they love the ability to go attack the opponent's objectives and stop them from moving. But what they struggled with is killing their opponent quick enough that when they lose those screens, they can then push out in the late game and retake objectives and, secure their win. So because they had that narrow band of playstyles, having consistent damage now in these upgraded datasheets dramatically allows AdMech to play more playstyles than just a jail style, and it allows them to consistently win a shootout with a lot of armies in the game between Scorpius Disintegrators and Iron Striders and Call. So I'm a huge fan of the changes. I think they're majorly impactful for AdMech. I've been playing AdMech for quite a while in this edition. This is the best AdMech has ever been by far.
For 10th edition?
For 10th edition.
Cool.
Yeah.
You said ever. I was like, for 10th?
In 10th edition. In 10th edition. 9th edition's a different beast. But I think they're in an amazing spot. I'm really excited to be playing a lot of games with AdMech. I plan to play them at some of the major tournaments coming up. And for me, what they were shoehorned into previously was a style that could go wrong. You go second in the wrong matchup against other infiltrating armies. Your move block, gets undone by an Overwatch or Flyover Mortals or something, and your opponent gets that one in and starts getting on your half of the board.
Yeah.
It was really hard for AdMech to ever push out of that, and now they can.
And that ability to now be able to is massive. This is the kind of shift that we talked about Custodes not getting.
Yes.
Right? This is night and day. It's right here. Underperforming faction. Do you fundamentally change the faction or do you get 30 points? Because we've seen before that 30 points wasn't going to change AdMech very much. We could have given him another 30 points.
They did it several times.
We can do it one more time. Nothing would happen. But yeah, I'm very excited for this. This is one where, because the changes we get are very significant, it's a little harder to call the shot. But we believe that AdMech was coming to the close of the last balance patch a little bit underrated. But not great. And now that we've solved a couple of fundamental problems, we think they're just taking the next step up. I'm with you. I think that the tier list of detachments within AdMech has not changed significantly, but because everything has gone up one level, you probably still have the same focus on Skitarii Hunter cohort as what we expect to be the focus. But at least everything else that also got better is now more playable.
If you still want to play a control style, 100% you can in Hunter cohort, but if you want to go more damage oriented, you go to Halo Screed, you go to Rad Zone, and those detachments offer additional power if you're going for a damage approach, something that just didn't really exist in a consistent way previously. And I think AdMech are going to go straight up to A tier, personally. I think they are one of the better armies in the game. I think they have a lot of advantages into similar level armies. And I think they're going to be pushing to do a lot more in the hands of skilled players. They're still going to be very difficult to play for the average player, but for a skilled, experienced AdMech pilot, I expect AdMech to start getting more than their most metas they're getting, in every 3 months they're getting 1 or 2 tournament wins. I expect more than that in the coming months.
I think it's very fair. I expect to see it as well, and I'm very excited to see what you come up with.
Absolutely.
Up next is our friends from the Craft Worlds, Aeldari.
Friends?
Our fellows from the Craft Worlds. We're friends when there's a Chaos Incursion.
Exactly.
So, very interesting one here. Aeldari kind of has the distinction of being the best army that didn't get nerfed. The Aeldari changes weren't particularly impactful. You see 1 points increase to Corsair Void Discard, and then you see points decreases to, honestly, a bunch of units that Eldar players weren't playing. And you do see a Hawk nerf as well. If you're taking large Hawk units, they get a nerf, but you can still take small Hawk units without paying any points premium. So not significant impact on Aeldari. We thought they were one of the better armies in the game before. A lot of the other armies we see are taking changes and are going to be lower on the tier list. So you're looking at the exact same Eldar as before, and there's just a different universe around them. And I think that's going to benefit them.
I think it's a universe that's pretty favorable to Eldar.
That's the best they could have asked for, really.
Absolutely. A lot of their hardest matchups did get a bit weaker. Now, one thing to say that might be a bit of a nerf is the lack of challenger cards. For Admech, a control army that's trying to hit objectives early, that's a buff, losing challenger cards. But for Aeldari, they don't necessarily want to try and have to be forced into holding primary early and often. They want to come back in the latter part of the game. Opponents run out of stuff. They overwhelm objectives with their T3 bodies. So the challenger card loss could be impactful here and end up restricting the overall win rate of Aeldari from what it could be. But I think positionally in the meta, the amount of damage output the army has, the amount of speed, the uninteractive abilities that they have, all of that allows for a dramatic expression of player skill among top player versus top player. And it also simply allows you to find ways to win games when there wasn't one or it was hard to see.
Yep. That's what I've seen so often in top player versus top player is it's not strictly that one person outplays the other and then the game ends. What often happens is one player is the first to take away play options, right? Usually Richard doesn't beat me at tournaments because he played so much better than me. It's because I see what he's doing to me and I look at my army and I realize I'm not actually gonna be able to stop him in time, and vice versa. And Eldar is very hard to shut down. You only shut Eldar down by killing them all. And if you can't catch them, you can't kill them. And then the Eldar player has play options until bottom of 5, and you had better outscore him by then. That's a tall ask. And so top players, we're still expecting to put up event wins with Eldar frequently.
Yeah, I frankly would not be surprised to see them have the most event wins in the upcoming meta.
I expect them to be up there. Now, we had them in A tier, I believe, the last time we ranked them. Or certainly at least you and I think, put them at A tier. And we could have put them in S, and we talked about it, but we didn't. We think that they were A tier going into this patch. We think that they're A tier now. To us, S tier is clearly head and shoulders above the game. And while I do believe that Eldar are very powerful and one of the best armies in the game right now, I think we're putting them right at the top of A tier, honestly. And I don't think that they're without answers, though. I think that a couple of the new things that are coming out, we actually just put Admech in A tier, and head-to-head, I would actually give the nod to Admech. I think Eldar may play the field a little bit better, but that's an A tier army that I don't think they're favored into. There's a couple of other armies, we'll allude to our green friends now, that I actually could see causing some problems for Eldar. There's a couple of builds, and it'll be very build-specific because Eldar is so varied. Does this build interact well with this build? What if you change the Fire Dragons for Swooping Hawks? What if you change, your Mega Knobs for 20-man boy squads? Who knows? Yeah. But I do believe there will still be answers for Eldar.
Yeah, I think the flexibility in Eldar of being able to say, okay, yes, my 20 Fire Dragons, they're not needed anymore. I don't need to double fire and fade those. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and grab Azurmen and some Dire Avengers or some Dark Reapers. I'm going to go ahead and grab more Hawks or whatever resources needed to put you over the edge into your local meta. Eldar have a extremely good and deep roster of strong, cheap units that can fit many different roles. And I think because of that, they have the depth to continue to succeed as the meta shifts and be one of the top armies in the game.
Yeah, I very much expect that to continue for Eldar, but I just don't think they're going to be the only problematic unit on the top of the hill.
I don't think they're going to be the last meta's Death Guard, where Death Guard had, I think, 3 times as many event wins as the second winningest faction.
It felt like.
It was something quite significant. I don't think a gap will be that big, and that is really the difference between S and A tier. I think people will have counters for Eldar if Eldar becomes the most dominant of the best armies.
After Aeldari, we're going to talk about the Astra Militarum here. So, Old Imperial Guard has been solid, weirdly dropped off of the meta. It felt like without taking significant nerfs. And I know for a lot of non-Guard players, the perception was that Guard went from one of the better armies in the game to not, without taking any real hits. The reality is that Guard did get bled a little bit by 1,000 cuts of just like small points increases did add up in a couple of places ever since the Bridgehead nerf.
Yep.
But I still believe they're in a perfectly good spot. The points changes that we see here is just a little bit more of a reshuffle than it is an actual nerf or a buff. Not enough went cheaper for me to say that Guard got buffed, not enough went up for me to say Guard got nerfed. You just kind of reshuffle your list, and maybe it used to be 2010, maybe it used to be 1990, but it doesn't really matter that much. Guard is in a solid position. It's a good border control army. It struggles a little bit into some of the armies that are above it, and it can oppress the armies that are below it. but it doesn't have that take over the world power to it anymore.
Yeah. Previously, it was really relying on like the deep strike and the damage plays from reserve, as well as some really nasty firepower, stacking AP and stripping cover. And it can still do all that stuff. It has less things overall. So you have less screens, less ability to contest objectives, or you just bring less damage instead. Guard used to get everything and have it all, and now they have to kind of pick and choose which direction they want to go. I think one of the limiting factors for them is they are mostly built around combined arms as a detachment, which is a good, solid, strong detachment that can fit a lot of different units in it, but it doesn't quite have, 3 distinct playstyles that people have to account for when they're thinking about Guard. When you look at Guard, you're like, okay, they're going to have some amount of tanks, decent amount of infantry, some transports, and then whatever their tech is. Is it going to be the horses? Is it going to be the Wolverine?
A Scion unit.
Yeah.
That's kind of it.
It's going to have a little bit of tech in there, but it's going to be kind of similar. There is a recon element detachment out there that has seen some play with a lot of bodies, very counter meta, which could see more play in this coming meta with Aeldari possibly at the top. But
it didn't receive any nerfs, but I have a theory that recon element will actually be less good as soon as the entire world is no longer building for Knights, Chaos Knights, Death Guard. Once I have to deal with a 20-man boys squad with Gazgul, once I have to deal with a bunch of AdMech infantry, I'm going to start thinking about it a little bit more, and I'm going to take things that kill infantry. And as soon as I'm not just stacking anti-tank weapons, killing all the guardsmen in time isn't as big of a deal. So I very much expect standard combined arms guard to be the most popular way. I do think recon element will still see play because, frankly, the only times I would see it played is by people who are experts of that play style. You see like Wesley St. Hines has done well at a couple events with these horde-style guard lists. And frankly, he's done it enough times that I fully believe he's still capable of doing it again, even though I think it's slightly less optimal now than it was before. And I still believe that I favor the tank build for myself personally, just to be the more balanced, have some ponies, have some tanks, have some cavalry, like some Metcav, Kazakh inside transports, a couple Scions and reserves, nice balanced approaches.
Yeah.
Still what I like, but those are the options, really. You either take the balanced bit of everything, or you take one of the hard skews in a niche direction with a niche detachment and see how it works.
When you kind of play honest 40k and you're not throwing too many curveballs, as players get more experience playing against that style, the matchup becomes figured out more quickly than against things where there's weird rules or different interactions. So I think Guard are pretty solidly in that B tier.
That's completely where I have them.
Next up, we have the Black Templars, a brand new codex released in August, and it has finally started to hit the meta, and its results are seemingly quite impressive. They have taken over the Gladius Task Force build, as once again, Black Templars really love being part of the Gladius fan club.
Blood Angels.
Really. So the flexibility of the detachment allows them to do what they do well, which is hit things really hard, giving them access to advance and charge, some speed, as well as reactive moves, and additional damage output. So Black Templars are really clustered around the Castellan Marshal combo, trying to get a unit that's going to have crit hits on 5s for lethals usually, and then full rerolls to hit from the Castellan in a Sword Brethren squad that staples those two characters together, popping out of Impulsors, then Repulsor Executioners, full rerolling against the enemy. And effectively, you look at that army and it's damage output that is relatively elite, but is mostly full rerolling to hit, with very strong damage output, very strong, very consistent damage output into a lot of targets in the meta. This is obviously going to fit very naturally into any sort of marine style, but especially one like a Stormlance or Gladius where you get access to advance and charge. And frankly, I think this is one of the better armies in the game because it just plays solid, good 40k consistently well. It has a full toolkit. Experienced players are going to find the plays to be able to, outplay their opponent and start gaining advantages across the table. And between reactive moves and the speed of the army, it can be difficult to slow it down once it starts getting rolling.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what Templars at least appears to be is good combat units with reactive move and fight on death, multiple types of reactive sword brethren, and transports. And that's a good art. You have as many abilities as possible to abuse your transports. You can get out of them in charge. You can call your doctrines while you're in transport, get out, hit people. You can react back into the transports. And you have a fight on death stratagem if you get caught outside of your transports. Back that up with some solid fundamental shooting that is not oath reliant at all because you don't get it. And you end up in a pretty good place. My one concern with Black Templars is that I think that they are an above average army that is a little bit too fair. I think above average army that's too fair is still landing solidly in A tier for me. But I think Black Templars are going to be good and really solid. If you play another fair Warhammer army, you're like, oh, sorry, bro, I'm wearing power armor and you're not. And then you get to Gladius Task Force all over them. But at some point, you're going to catch the matchup where they're not trying to be fair. And you're going to be like, oh, the Eldar player does have a ruin where they can stage after killing me and be out of charge range. And I can't reach them this turn. And I'm going to try to stage. All right, you killed the 2 things that were staging, and I can't reach the fire dragons again. And you're just going to realize that once you run out of tricks, the rope ends sharply.
Yeah.
Right, there is a drop off once you can't play the game.
Hitting your opponent ludicrously hard is amazing. It's a great thing to have.
Great place to be.
But as soon as you are not able to hit them because they're move blocking you, 5 war spiders are in front of your transport blocking you from getting anywhere.
My voice guard can wrap an impulsor.
Yep.
Not that hard.
It can be a little bit difficult, so I do believe that their rules as a core put them above the vast majority of the game, but against some of the other top armies, they might be a little bit towards the bottom of A tier, in my opinion.
Firmly above average, but I'm not expecting... I'm expecting to see Templars put out good win rate, normal event wins.
Yeah, and they definitely could play an Iron Storm or Stormlance style, but Gladius has seemingly been the go-to so far with the Codex.
Makes sense. After Black Templars, we see Blood Angels. Oh, Blood Angels.
Another type of Angry Marine.
There's always another Angry Marine. So, Blood Angels, we see small changes, but it's a buff to Sangard that is packaged with a points nerf, but not such a significant one that I think it really removes the unit as an option. Instead of being too cheap and probably not as good as they should be, just too cheap, they're as good as they should be and they cost like it, but they're not overpriced. So, where this puts Blood Angels is... you're relying less on the Codex melee units because Jump Pack Intercessors and Blade Guard Veterans in max size just went up in points a little bit. And I think you're okay, though, just saying, yeah, I'm going to lean more into Sanguinary Guard. I'm going to lean more into the Blood Angels parts of Blood Angels, and you're still in a very solid place.
Yeah, I believe Angelic Inheritors, which is the Cropmist detachment, is one of the strongest ways to play Blood Angels. A lot of MSU Sanguinary Guard, a lot of, jump pack characters. You got Dante in there. You bring a decent amount of shooting to make sure that you can clear screens and push up the table and play a full, well-rounded game of 40k. You've got the Sanguinor in there for some tricky melee combat. And then overall, you end up playing more of a trade style with this Blood Angels rather than I'm going to hit you with a big brick of units, hopefully kill a couple of yours or one key target and keep doing that 2-3 times and eventually your opponent falls over. This one, Angelic Inheritors, can play a more balanced version of Blood Angels, which I think is typically a bit better into the high skill than top of the meta. One advantage that Blood Angels does have against a lot of the meta, or at least some of the counters to a melee-centric army, is that they have fly keyword in abundance. So screening them is significantly more difficult than against, say, a Black Templars, which doesn't quite have the fly keyword in mass like Blood Angels do. But their units are usually a little bit more expensive, and in the case of Blood Angels or Black Templars units do generally hit harder when they staple those 2 characters together. So... where are you leaning for the Blood Angels? I could see bottom of A. I could see a top of B scenario where they're very close. They're still fairly elite for a Marine chapter, and they kind of want to be relatively balanced, but the shooting doesn't gain much in Blood Angels as a whole.
I see bottom of A. My take on Blood Angels is that they're another above average faction that does its thing, and when it can't do its thing, it just falls. I think that Blood Angels are actually one of the melee armies that is less good into other melee armies, because they don't hit nearly as hard when they get charged. And that's one of those things where, they charge, you charge them, great. They charge you, oh God, please stop. And so if you're not able to set it up properly because you're relatively elite or your opponent gets an ingress on you or whatever happens, you suffer a little bit. And then I also think that they are more one-dimensional than a lot of other good armies, and they're very good at that one dimension.
Oh yeah.
And so that does, in my mind, put them into A tier, but I see them as that bottom end of A tier, I think. Definitely not the top of A tier, I should say. Middle bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd agree with that, and I think Blood Angels fans will be really happy because they keep getting some consistent love in these data slates, whether it's profile adjustments or points decreases, but Blood Angels have been a consistent.
I think the reality is that every single Blood Angels player likes Sanguinary Guard in concept, And I think we're at a point where you probably just want to take 3 units of them. And hey, look, if someone held a gun to my head and said, you have to take 3 of one of your identifying faction units, or it's why I don't complain that I have to take 3 Noise Marine squads. Like, yeah, I love you. I'm playing Emperor's Children because I like Noise Marines. Like, all right, I have to take them, so be it. I will. If that's it.
Yeah, they fill a role that is what Blood Angels is looking for, and they do it the best in class.
And they look good while they do it.
They look so good. Next up, we have a Chaos Demons, Nick's favorite faction in the entire game. And Demons have been on a little bit of a roller coaster in terms of getting out of new rules. They got new detachments earlier in the year for the different Chaos Gods. They then got the Shadow Legion, which was an enhanced new playstyle for them that has seen a lot of play. And of course, they still have their old Index detachment, which is basically Monster Bash the army, throwing durability out there and trying to get your opponent to see if they have enough damage output. Now, unfortunately for them, the meta recently has been very hostile for I'm durable with a couple units, because the meta was Knights, Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights, Death Guard, and all of a sudden, here's all the anti-tank, here's all the damage I can bring in my list. I'm going to cut all that scoring, all that trash. Here's just damage, and that's not really what Demons want to see. In addition to that, a lot of their profiles have gotten cheaper, a lot of their supporting pieces, their control pieces, and things like Screamers are generally very good in that role, but the lack of damage output outside of their couple monsters is quite significant. It's very lacking.
Yeah, unfortunately, you really do notice it. It's that it feels like you take these units to deal damage, you take these units if you want to survive. And somehow you have to take enough of both to have something that survives to score points, something that does damage enough to not get whale on the whole time. And unfortunately, I think that the combination is wrong. Just the way that the points come together, even with things that are cheap, like Great Unclean Ones and Rodriguez, very cheap for their defensive profile.
Mm-hmm.
Every Demons unit to me is too mono role, and they don't have cheap units to fill the roles properly, and so they end up slightly overpaying on some things. And even though a Great Unclean One I still think is too cheap, it doesn't come together into a 2,000 point list the way that I want to.
Yeah, and Shadow Legion lets you access some of those Chaos Space Marines that should fill this role, but there's a lack of buffs, especially outside of stratagems, to allow them to punch up in a way where they're consistent damage dealers without specific stratagems.
Yeah, that's a very difficult place to be, honestly. I mean, one of the things that I think really gets me with Demons is that Demons are usually played as a stat check defense with enough output to try to stop you from wailing on them. But then the reality hits at a certain point where many armies just do have the damage, and they are tall enough for this ride.
Mm-hmm.
Where I've seen people bounce off the Great Unclean with a forward Funeral Pain, and boy, that's unfortunate, but we get there at the end, and some people don't. and some people do just kill them. I've done it.
Yep, I've done it plenty of times. Even with armies that are in lower damage output like Drukhari.
Yeah, Emperor's Children, you just still kill them. And as soon as they're just stuck getting wailed on, the army really lose any dynamic ability and choices once the game starts. Once the armies are fighting each other, I find that Demons are a very low choice army. You have choices in how you deliver. Am I playing Shadow Legion? Do I have the ACDC? Do I have Scout? Do I have an Ingressing Thirster? Do I have 6-inch Deep Strike and Demonic Incursion? Once you are hitting each other, Demons are just there. You're committed to the line you took, and the line you took is, from this position, I am rolling saves and rolling attacks, and I don't really have a lot of rerolls in any direction.
Yeah.
It's a very hard army, I find, to outplay really good players on. And to me, that's the big point of emphasis, is we're talking about, let's say this is being played by a very good Demons player. They're out there. This is not shade, right? There are very good Demon players out there. We're putting that very good Demon player into another very good player. We're putting them into a very good Orc player, or World Eater player, or Space Marine player, or Eldar player. I am never betting on the Demons. Ever.
And it's not the Demons player's fault.
Nope.
Because a lot of, like you said, a lot of their choices are restricted, and a lot of what they have is stats mostly. And as soon as the opponent is able to deal with those stats, it becomes a weaker army overall.
Yeah, so I see Demons as an army that's quite struggling right now. I don't think the changes that matter are favorable for them. Their buffs were irrelevant because there were 2 buffs to Slanesh units that got horribly mangled a while back, and they are not back to full power yet. They're not back to, I would take this in the list yet.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. And so I just don't see Demons having good matchups into much. It feels like it's a stat check army that's trying to capitalize on an opponent who can't handle it. And once the opponent puts their hand up and says, I actually can handle this, you don't do anything besides leverage the stat check. You leverage it to vest your ability, but once you're there, if they can just kill you, they're gonna.
There's a complete lack of plan B here.
Yes, there is absolutely no seatbelt on this ride. And I'm like, how many times have we seen it where the demon player rocks in and rolls 80% 4-ups on their great unclean one, and they make it to the top table of a major? Awesome. And they make it to the top table of the major, and at some point in this game, they make 20% of their 4-ups, and the game ends. It is a wet thud that gets shown on ESPN highlights for the next week because they just died. It every time. And you're giving up control when you choose to take most demon lists in it. I think Bellacor's Shade Legion, Shadow Legion, Legion of Shadow, that one. I'm coming around to that one being the best way. I was on the incursion terrain for a little bit, and I kept playing against it. I just being like, man, you really are choosing when you stat check me. And after that, we are rolling dice at each other, and I start making choices, and you stop. Yeah. Every time.
Shadow Legion has more flexibility, more data sheet options, and a good suite of stratagems. It just doesn't have that next level, in my opinion. So I think demons are in that C tier for sure.
We even had the discussion of putting them in D tier, but at the end of the day, the stat check game plan that we don't like to rely on is a real game plan. This army is not beyond help. And I think that's where D tier is going.
I think what Games Workshop has been doing to enhance data sheets around the game could definitely come back to demons to help them fill a few more roles, which they're currently lacking.
Following Chaos Demons is Chaos Knights. So Chaos Knights were part of the Trident of Terror that was run in the meta for 2 or 3 months there over the summer, where they have a new codex. They got a really nice lease on life with a minor stats debuff and a massive points decrease. Love that. Those went together well. And a fairly solid codex coming out at the same time really put them in a good position. They have been reined back. They got a points change along with the other 2 broken armies. And then they also got a rules change on top of that, which the other ones kind of escaped. Imperial Knights is a little different. But Chaos Knights are now a very good army that has received 2 levels of nerfs. And that makes them pretty good still. Their nerfs were to an aspect of the army that was oppressive. And that didn't go from 100 to 0 in one step. It definitely is worse than before, but you still see a Chaos Knight army that has the bones intact. You still have good dynamic elements in Infernal Lance. You still have the same weaknesses of sometimes I do get locked down and I run out of options. You have a plan B in Chaos Knights, you may not have a plan C. And then you've got good damage, but you have limited profiles without rerolls. And so the good damage is good, but if you have too many, I rolled 2 dice and they both missed in a row. Or, you roll 36 dice. You're like, well, on average, I get 6 lethals here, but this time I got 3. Or you give your opponent too many. Here's, 8 AP1 saves. I made 6 out of 8 4-ups. Like, all right, well, that wasn't crazy, but it does mean there's a float drone in Melta range right now. So shoot. That can happen a lot where I think Chaos Knights are a good army that is no longer so good that it surpasses risk. And it is now a good army that has risks associated.
Yeah, I think they've done a great job of bringing them down a notch or 2. I still feel like their ability to outshoot a lot of people with the triple to spoiler is still quite significant.
Yeah.
The damage output of those knights far surpasses pretty much all of them. And I think the spoiler builds are what's going to keep Chaos Knights towards the top half of the game.
I would agree completely. By going down in the number of big knights you're taking, you're minimizing the point increases. By going only 3 to spoilers, you can essentially run a list that is like 1 armiger less than it was 2 months ago. And that, for what that army was, this is a perfectly fine place to be. You are no longer broken, but you're still pretty good. You have demon allies. I know we just ragged on demons, but the demon allies bring the stat check with some dimension behind it. Really important, it turns out. And then you have plenty of options. I think Chaos Knights still have at least 2 detachments that I'm genuinely interested in. Lords of Dread, I think, has sailed. But I genuinely think Houndpack Lance is pretty good. And I think that Infernal Lance is pretty good. I think it's the best one still. You have a very valid army here that is no longer taking over stat checks. But I think it's still it's a stat check that has a little bit more to it.
Yeah, especially as you're bringing 4 or so War Dogs in addition to the Big Knight.
Yeah, you get to choose more of the timing. You get to play the game first. Your stat check does not involve you putting your stats directly in front of your opponent. It's a stat check that can be standing far away and shooting and saying, yeah, you're not able to connect on me in a way that does it. Whereas demons stat check you by walking up close, like taking a peek, trying to read the label on the back of your shirt and seeing if your stats are up to code, you're going to get punched in the mouth. But Chaos Knights can do it from a distance, and then it's actually more choices.
Yeah, they're going to benefit a decent amount from the fact that the Host of Ascension GSC build has taken a hit, which we'll get to. Aeldari's still going to be lurking out there, and that's very dangerous with the Fire Dragons, but if you're taking more ranged knights and trying to stay away from them, only let them interact with War Dogs, you can at least play a bit longer than simply, here's my Lords of Dread Knights in the front of you, can you deal? And they're like, yes, button, you're dead.
They say yes, you're dead. I completely agree. And it's a good place to be for the faction. So I'm quite excited for that. I think Chaos Knights are more interesting now than they were a couple months ago, because now it's going to take a little bit more skill expression. There's a lot more risk inherent to playing the army, but the results can still be there. Everything Chaos Knights did that was good before, they still can do now. You still can sticky objectives and have knights titanically shooting people harder than they were expecting with armor just ranging in front. You still can do that. It's just no longer free, and it's no longer I can throw away armigers while doing this and not suffer the consequences because I'm that good.
One thing that can keep them propped up here is the fact that if the meta shifts a bit towards more bodies in some of the top A-tier armies, and less in terms of anti-tank, knights, if the standard of your list is no longer I need to kill 2 big knights in a turn and becomes I need to kill like a horde of boys or something, Chaos Knights benefit tremendously from that.
That is extremely true. So I'm so excited for where Chaos Knights are. For me, this is A-tier. This is no longer oppressive. It's still solid. I do think it's towards the lower end of A-tier. I think it is a firmly above average faction, but I think that it is a little bit too risky inherently to be dominant in singles formats. I think at the end of the day, Chaos Knights are a faction that fundamentally lacks rerolls. And so you're going to have in a 6-round event, you're going to have, hey, take 3 las cannon saves. I failed 3 of them. Oops.
Yikes.
I lost an extra knight. The game is now over. Because I now don't have enough to respond, whereas if I had passed one of these, I do.
Yep.
And so I think that that's going to keep Chaos Knights from being that upper A tier, but I think they are still powerful enough and enough above what I'm putting in B tier that I'm keeping them towards the lower end of A tier. All right, our final Chaos faction with Chaos in the name is Chaos Space Marines.
Yay!
Chaos Space Marines technically got changes, but again, this is another one where it feels like it's just had some viable builds, plus 10 here, minus 10 there, and we sure still are playing Chaos Space Marines.
One of the things I will say about Chaos Space Marines is that out of all the factions in the game, they might have the best diversity of competitive builds than any other army. If we look at it, we have Creations of Bile for a melee approach. We have Renegade Raiders for a nice balanced shooting combat approach. We have Packbound, mostly leans on the shooting. You have access to Chaos Cult, a horde version of the army. Veterans of Long War, another mixed, balanced approach.
And SEO.
That's a lot of different viable detachments and competitive styles for an army to have. So Chaos Space Marines have good data sheets that can switch between these. Yeah. And for me personally, I think they've been one of the better balanced armies throughout the whole edition. They've had their ups, they've had a little bit of downs, but they've generally been just a good, solid army. And one reason that they've become less popular over the last several months is the fact that all of the Chaos Cult legions, Thousand Sons, Death Guard, World Eaters, have all been released. And so, yes, Chaos Space Marines is really excited, the main way to play a Chaos Marine style for a long time. But when all these Chaos Cult books came out, oh, the Chaos Space Marine player wants to go experiment with this. They want to do this. Oh, this is a cool thing they can do. And so it hasn't seen as much dedicated following from the top competitive players as much recently, but it is still very strong.
Yeah, and that's just a happy place to be. Like, you like having 5 viable detachments in your fairly balanced army that doesn't really need nerfs. I mean, the past 3 balance patches for Chaos Space Marines have all been the same as this, right? We had one where we buffed like 2 data sheets that weren't popular. We buffed them to the level that you occasionally see them and still not that often. Right, Vashtor and the
Lord Discordant.
Lord Discordant.
It's been seen a decent amount.
Yeah, which you'll see it, but it's not like taking over anything. It's not impressive at all. It doesn't need to go up in points. And so, to me, this is like B+. This is the definition of B+. This is a good, solid army that is not pigeonholed into one build. You have plenty of room for skill expression. It does not inherently have massive advantages over other factions. It just has a lot of options, and if a good player wants to go seek out those options, they will be rewarded for it.
And one of the reasons why it won't quite make A here is that it is very susceptible to the anti-elite infantry firepower similar to Custodes that exists in the meta. There's a lot of 3-wound Chaos Space Marine bodies that really suffer against things like blow drones or forge fiends or this top meta shooting output. And that is one of the reasons I would drop it down from an A tier down to like top of B. I feel pretty comfortable at CSM there.
Yeah, I think I'm perfectly content with that. I think that's a very happy place for them to be. So I'm good with that. Yeah, that's a B tier for Chaos Space Marines. Next faction up here is the Dark Angels. Dark Angels have gotten a perfectly reasonable amount of love. They've gotten buffs to the Lion. They got a points decrease on the Ravenwing Darkshroud. The Landspeeder Vengeance got a little bit of a glow up as well. They redid the damage nerf that was given to them in the Codex. So they're back to Index, which is a great place to be because they're actually pretty strong at it.
Yeah.
And so we now have a Dark Angels army that is still fundamentally Dark Angels. Nothing changed. The list is going to look almost exactly the same. We just got little touch-ups and glow-ups in a couple places, which is nice. Previously, I would have put Dark Angels as C tier. And these glow-ups are all giving you more reason to play Dark Angel specifically, which is good because every single Codex supplement really comes with this question, this underlying truth of what if I take my red Space Marines and instead of playing them as Blood Angels, I play them as Ultramarines. And this goes both ways because many times I've had people ask me, what if I play my Blue Angels as Dark Angels? And that's good too. So this comparison ends up being very rough of you've made Dark Angels better at being Dark Angels, but have you made them a better Space Marine? My take is no. What we've done is we've taken the Lion as a solo beatstick character and we've made him better at his job because he can now do the Feel No Pain Against Mortals and the rerolls at the same time, which is what you want him to do. So he can be close enough to be okay. He's still a little bit fragile for a 300-point unit with a 3-up interval, which is crazy for me to describe him as fragile, but he kind of is. And so you end up in a weird place of like, oh yeah, I can take him and he's now like worth taking, but he's not why I play Dark Angels. He has gone from if I'm playing Dark Angels, I should take him. Like that's where he is now. Instead of you shouldn't take him even if you're playing Dark Angels. The Landspeeder Vengeance, a solid shooting piece that Dark Angels have access to that no one else does. But I wouldn't say that Space Marines were really suffering for their lack of good ranged shooting pieces. That hasn't been the problem with the faction, broadly speaking. And yeah, it's probably slightly more reliable and slightly more fragile than the other options you had in front of you. And so that's an interesting place to be. But it's not, you're not really remaking the mold here. The Dark Shroud down 15 points. Wow, it's a more efficient defensive buff, but 15 points and a unit you literally never take 2 of is just that you take your old list that had a Dark Shroud and you say, oh, maybe I'll replace Infiltrators with a Dark Shroud if I didn't have one. If I did have a Dark Shroud already, I'll go ahead and promote one of my Scout squads to an Incursor squad. Okay. That's cool. Doesn't really change anything. And so I still really struggle to say that Dark Angels should be taken over Space Marines. If you like Dark Angels, they're better than before. But the truth is that the reason you play Dark Angels is for their unique data sheets, which are a little bit expensive. Because Deathwing Knights are better than Assault Terminators, and they cost 70 points more. They cost a Scout Squad more. Lionel Johnson is a good melee brick, but he's more of a melee unit than a buffing unit. He's not like a Guilliman. He looks like he should be compared to Guilliman, but he's not. The Lion is much more comparable to a unit of Blade Guard veterans with a Justiciar, which he's better than, but that unit kind of sucks. That's not a big deal. And so you're like, oh, I'm just playing Dark Angels in order to take their units, which cost more, and now I'm a more elite version of Space Marines. And that's fine. But honestly, if they didn't have +1 to wound from oath a moment, it would be a side grade. But one of them does and one of them doesn't. And it doesn't overcome that gap for me. And so I really struggle with Dark Angels as like, yeah, it's more fun if I'm going to play Dark Angels now, but that's not a reason not to play Ultramarines. For me, I think this is like upper C tier. This is still a below average army. You take Space Marines, and when you decide to add your flavor, what you do is you give them more expensive, better, unique units, which already compounds the problem of sometimes my army's too elite. Sometimes Space Marines are too elite, and Dark Angels are more than too elite, because the best parts of Dark Angels are the units that cost 250 points, or the units that cost 315 points. That's the best part of Dark Angels. And since you don't have because 3-man Black Knights aren't a thing for less than 100 points that's worth anything at all, you just don't have another dimension to Dark Angels. You only play them for the expensive units, and Space Marines don't need more expensive units.
Yeah, if we contrast them with Black Templars don't have Oath, Dark Angels do, but for losing Oath, they gain access to a very easy +1 to wound mechanic, and on top of that, they also get access to unique units that are cheaper on average, or if you spend the extra characters, hit significantly harder than the Space Marine combat units generally, and so you have something unique that isn't creating and forcing you into a more elite Marine style, which really can't happen. The Marines, they don't have any extra room to become more elite right now to be able to compete at the top level. They're kind of at the bare minimum of scoring trashy screening units around, and they have their core. As soon as you cut any more from that, there's no leeway anymore.
Completely. And in the changes since the last time Dark Angels was the best Space Marine chapter, they've cut away a lot of the unique elements of Space Marines that could bleed over and be a best-in-class unit. Like the Fire Discipline Eradicator unit, which was this is the only one of these you can take, but it is a world-class unit and it's worth overpaying for. You no longer have Space Marine units where I say, I'm going to take one of these and it's best in class, I'll take one. You don't have that anymore. Space Marines is taking 2 or 3 of the data sheets that work and getting more of them. And Dark Angels don't run that way because you're spending more of your points on the expensive unit. Deathwing Knights are tougher than Thunderhammer Stormshield Terminators. Are they 70 points tougher? Maybe. Kind of depends on what you're playing against. Do they hit harder? Yeah. Do they hit 70 points harder? Maybe. Kind of depends on what you're playing against. I think Dark Angels really needs that Oath removal. Dark Angels don't need Oath. Their whole shtick is you're taking a weapon skill 2 melee units with a reroll 1s to hit aura. I don't need Oath. So it's just it's a top-a-C thing for me. It's a solid army, but it's not good. And it really doesn't have much competitive merits because you're just going to be playing Space Marines.
Honestly, they're the biggest sufferer of the fact that the Space Marine Codex got such an elevated version of Oath, and also is now getting new detachments that are opening really competitive styles.
Yeah, and it just doesn't compare. Each chapter has to have something it does uniquely to compare, and I think some of the chapters have their own detachment. Dark Angels don't. Wrath of the Rock does not compare to Gladius or Storm Knights. Neither does Inner Circle Task Force. It doesn't compare. Or you have something else. Templars don't have a detachment, but they have their own version of Oath, and then their data sheets are more competitive than Dark Angel ones. And that kind of ends it.
All right, well, top of C for Dark Angels for now. Let's move on over to the Death Guard. So Death Guard have been the top meta contender for the last several months. They are the winningest army by tournament results, and they have done it in multiple different ways. Some of those have been nerfed harder than others. In particular, the Mortarian's Hammer version with the triple Plague Burst Crawler picking things across the table to count as in Afflicted so that Death Shrouds could deep strike behind them and open up all sorts of gaps. That style's been hit the hardest with the increases to the Plague Burst Crawler as well as to the Death Shrouds. And what we've seen is a more significant pivot back towards the Index detachment, the Virulent Vectorium, which has access to a lot of good stratagems, including -1 damage. It also has a 5 of Phenopane T12 Demon Prince, where you can put -1 damage, he can reduce stratagem cost, and the detachment loves stratagems, and you potentially could have Mortarion in this detachment as well. A lot of durability all in one place. It can still do the Death Shroud 6-inch deep striking and hitting targets. It can still bring in your Blowtrones and your Flamer versions. It's a very balanced version of Death Guard, but heavily zoning in on that durability, and if you are an army that can't handle -1 damage, you are going to have a very, very bad time very quickly. Some armies can't.
Some armies can't, and when it happens, it burns. You feel it. Still, the points changes that they took were real, and I think the fact that everyone spent so long gearing up for them.
Oh yeah, and playing against them.
Is one of those things, right, where you're not going to rock up with a Death Guard army now and have your opponent remembers how to play against 2,300 points of Death Guard, then how to play against 2K. And so, despite that, what I would call massive disadvantages, we still think Death Guard are really darn good.
They have fantastic rules. Their army rule, the ability to afflict things with the various debuffs. -1 save is one of the strongest rules in the entire game. It is absolutely amazing, especially because the meta usually gravitates towards 3-up and 2-up save units. The difference of -1 save on those units is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
On top of the natural durability of Death Guard, there's invulns everywhere, there's potential minuses to hit, and then of course this -1 damage access. It's very difficult to deal with in mass. Death Guard can play a stat check style, they can play a trade style if they want to, they have the damage output. It's a very well-balanced army for what it is. It doesn't have dramatic speed outside of the Death Shroud 6-inch Deep Strike, but it's above average with all the Bloatrones and the Demon Prince and possibly Mortarion.
And so we think this is going to end up firmly in A tier.
Yes.
We do think that it has been toned down enough to not be an S. We do think that enough counters exist that it should not be an S. I don't even think this is the top of A tier. I think this is middle of A tier. It's good. It has matchups that are favorable into a lot of the game, but into the other A tier armies, it does not oppress them.
No.
It could beat them. Doesn't always. Has 1 or 2 bad matchups, has 1 or 2 good matchups within the context of A tier, but it's just firmly in A tier, not exceeding it.
Yeah. Death Guard, and the player playing Death Guard now has to use player skill and decision making to be able to outplay their opponent, not simply rely on the fact that they have more stuff that's more durable, that has better rules than most things in the game. And I think we finally reached a pretty good place for Death Guard. I think Games Workshop handled it relatively well. There's probably a couple small tweaks they can do here and there, as well as some increases to a couple things that are probably above average of what they should be, but it's no longer in an oppressive sense, I think.
I completely agree with that. Up next is going to be Deathwatch. So another Space Marine Codex supplement here. Now, we've talked a couple of times, this is our 4th time talking to Space Marine supplement, about how we're going to talk about a Space Marine chapter that's not Space Marine, where you have to have a reason for me to not take Ultramarines. Deathwatch has 1 detachment because Deathwatch is still a Codex supplement index, not a Codex. And so you end up with this detachment and these unique data sheets have to be the Y. The detachment, Black Spear, does involve the data sheets and the keywords enough that they kind of go together. This is, you do not run kill teams in a Gladius. It doesn't work. So you only have this one build, which is teleporting kill teams around. This build wasn't awful, did just gain like 60 to 80 points depending on how you're building your list, which is actually pretty significant.
Yep.
And so you can actually end up in a very good place of, yeah, I can fit enough Deathwatch units on, and I can teleport a lot of Space Marines around and shoot people. But you do very much still have, I am Space Marines teleporting around without Oath. And one of the biggest things is, again, we make that comparison to Space Marines. What you do uniquely is you teleport big, tough units around and shoot hard, because you don't have any particularly impressive combat delivery mechanics. You have like 1 or 2 units that can advance or charge with the cheaper Deathwatch Watchmaster, and they run out of a Rhino and hit people, and hey, that's cool. It's a good trick. Other than that, you're just kind of...
Now, they do have Oath, just not +1 to wound.
Yeah, sorry, they do have Oath, but it does not have +1 to wound Oath.
Yes, the version that John is...
Super Oath. We need a name for this. Yeah, they don't have Super Oath. And so it's good rules, good plan A and B, lacks a plan C. It's not as flexible as other Space Marines because you aren't taking good combat units because most of the kill teams aren't good in combat. You have 1 or 2 that, you'll take your Deathwatch veterans who are good in combat and everything else isn't. And then you're going to take a bunch of kill teams that teleport around and shoot, and they declare 9-inch charges so that they can hit you with like 2 power fists and a character. Okay. But you don't fall back and shoot. You don't fall back and charge. And if your opponent is ever able to successfully screen you, you're not great at ingressing and walking because you're kind of slow. You teleport, but you're kind of slow. And it's a little bit CP intensive. And so I just end up looking at Deathwatch and saying like, oh wow, there's a lot of cool things here, but I don't know if it's enough. Right, I can compare to Raven Guard, which if I'm good at teleport Space Marines shooting around, I think Shadowmark Talon does it a little bit better. Because I think you get better support. You have a fallback and shoot stratagem. Mm-hmm. You have 1 stratagem to shoot harder instead of 3 stratagems to shoot harder. But that 1 is the best one. Right? It's better than any of the special issue ammos. The fact that you can't do it twice is like, okay, but you can just take better units. Because I don't think that the Deathwatch kill teams are significantly better than Space Marine units. They're better, but not significantly. And not, I don't care about +1 to wound better. Because I do care about +1 to wound. a lot. And at the end of the day, when you take a normal Space Marine attachment instead of Black Spear, it doesn't pigeonhole you into units. It's kind of like Space Wolves, where Space Wolves really want you to take Space Wolf units, and Deathwatch really wants you to take the Kill Team units, and Deathwatch does not want you to take regular Inceptors who aren't attached to 3 heavy intercessors. Because that's what I want to do. I just want to take just the Inceptors, no frills, just the guns I care about. Deliver that unit, shoot it hard. Deathwatch wants me to take a couple of jump pack intercessors, put it in front of my Inceptors, a couple heavy intercessors with my Eradicators, and not reroll hits and wins of damage against vehicles. I'm like, well, I don't mind doing that, but it's less exciting. So I think Deathwatch is still C tier. I think that they got noticeably better, and they went from bottom of C tier to top of C tier, because I still don't think they're cracking that level into B tier. Maybe they're the bottom of B tier. We'll find out. They probably are if we play them really well, but I just don't think that it's the best way to play Space Marine teleporting guns, and I don't think it's the most forgiving way to play Space Marine teleporting guns, and I don't think it's uniquely amazing into the rest of the meta, because it still has problems that are very obvious. Once you've played against Deathwatch, you know what to do. They teleport guns around 9 inches away from you and shoot you and declare a 9-inch charge. If you can just screen that out while hiding behind a wall and not getting shot from long range, that's it. That's what they did.
You did it.
You did it. I've seen it and I've done it. And if you can go tag them in combat, they don't fall back and do anything. They're going to hit you with their armored fists. And that's it. What they're going to do.
It's an army once it's pushed back on its half of the board, it's very hard to ever dig out of it quick enough.
It rolls downhill very well. If it's working its game plan, it's fantastic, but it doesn't bounce back when the game plan falls apart. And for me, that's a C tier army.
Next up, we have Drukhari. So they are waiting in the wings for their codex. So we'll see how that ends up shaking things up. But right now in the index, Drukhari has seen a good amount of play, both in singles and teams. We've mostly seen Reaper's Wager emerge as the dominant style for Drukhari, because in the summer update, it received the reroll 1s always. And the consistency factor is massive because pain tokens are a little bit inconsistent, especially in the early game. Reaper's Wager doesn't have that stack that a Real Space Raid does. And so you need the rerolls on your units to be able to attack things efficiently and do damage. As soon as Drukhari run out of ways to do damage, the army falls apart. Unless you are able to screen your opponent like turn after turn, but it can be very difficult to do that. So once you have a consistent damage aspect and then stratagems to support that, as well as a good amount of flexibility, you are just playing a game of 40k where your speed, kind of like Aeldari, can just let you find plays against your opponent. And now they don't have the supreme output of an Aeldari. There's no Fire Dragon unit here. There's nothing that's going to look at a knight and be like, no, you're just dead, and you can't interact with me. They can do that over time with Scourges and adding in Talos, maybe using Fire and Fate from Real Space Raid, but they're not just completely tabling somebody in a turn. They have a lot of trickery of, disembark Lelis unit, kill something in front of a wall, have the Venom behind the wall, end of fight phase, you get back in, you're hidden, you're going to get to use this resource multiple times. They can find ways to outplay people. Small positioning things with Drukhari can be the difference between the game completely shifting in their favor, or, a failed charge, or, them not killing you and being stuck there on the table, losing level in our squad, can be the difference between winning and losing. So it's a very narrow margins with Drukhari, but they're rewarded for finding plays and for setting up plays. And I think for me personally, I found Drukhari to be, a solid B tier army where it has a good amount of tools, has some weaknesses, stat checks it doesn't necessarily want to play against, but it does have the ability to actually kill them. And at minimum, if you can find ways to delay using the Beast Pack or some of the other resources, just slow that down a little bit, gain an extra turn, you'll be fine.
Yes, I completely agree. There's a lot of elements for player expression. We've seen Cody Giroux and Skari do well with it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have enough power for me to cross over into A tier.
Yeah, I don't think it has enough advantages into the best armies in the game that it's necessarily going to be up there, but it can put up a fight into anything.
Yeah.
And it is heavily reliant on the player skill aspect.
And we'll see if the codex changes that.
Absolutely.
So B tier feels like a good place for Drukhari. Up next is Emperor's Children, the 3rd Legion, the Chosen of Slaanesh, an army that I have been playing a lot of recently. I absolutely adore this new Emperor's Children Codex. I think to date, I haven't played anything else since that Codex hit shelves to tournament. It's just been Emperor's Children for every single one because I love this army. And they're in a very interesting spot where they didn't see significant changes. We're going to see a small buff to Flawless Blades that brings them into a unit you could actually consider taking. Very minor point adjustments. Fulgrim didn't change whatsoever. And
Games Workshop.
Nope, he did not change whatsoever. And then we see that Emperor's Children were in a very polarizing place before, where the community perception of Emperor's Children was that they were not very good. This was one that I have loudly and publicly disagreed with. I think Emperor's Children are very good, and I will continue to think that. Emperor's Children are very complicated and hard to play, and they fall apart when you don't get it right. And this makes this a very difficult faction to get really good results out of. But when you assemble the puzzle correctly, it's terrifying. The army can feel oppressive when it works the way that it's supposed to work, and if you can get there. And we saw that, I think the best way that I can describe how Emperor's Children has been for chapter proof so far is that they had a 4% win rate and multiple super major wins. It was not just me. I saw them win a 3-day event in Spain. They've won other events, but the way that they're doing it is with Coterie of the Conceited Double Mauler Fiend. The list that won those two super majors I'm referencing were point for point identical. Because that's the build. And now you can argue that on UKTC terrain, I would consider changing the list slightly. You can pivot the last 200 points. But 1,800 points of that list are the exact same. And it's Coterie of the Conceited, and that is still where we're at. And so you have a mono build that's very hard to play, very high reward when you get it correctly. Some of the bad matchups that we have, Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights were genuinely difficult. I think that both of those matchups are much more, manageable with the points and build changes. As soon as you go away from 6 big knights to 3 big knights and armigers, I can kill armigers anytime I want. Night and day, they're dead. That's not the problem, right? All my guns are strength 5 and 10. Going from T11 to 9 is everything for me. But then, there are still going to be some hard games out there. I think that we match up relatively well into some armies that got buffed, like Orks and World Eaters. I think we're perfectly fine to add mech. I don't think we like the new Votann Codex. So for me, Emperor's Children is going to come out of this as still a mono build, still has all of the same problems as before. You are hard to play. There are some matchups you don't like. If you mess it up against anything, even the good matchups, you die. But we're not rating what happens on average. And so for me, I'm still putting Emperor's Children in 8 tier.
And that doesn't surprise me because honestly, with the amount of player skill that you can exercise with the army, the speed of it, it's overwhelming. If people, and the meta has really shifted very high on damage output, it doesn't really have the screening to be able to hold back an Emperor's Children army, certainly not for multiple turns. And you, the way you play it, you are comfortable saying, I'll have a little bit of a deficit in the early game. I'll wait for that opportunity, and then I'm going to strike with everything. And when you do a play like that, your opponent has to make so many decisions on the follow-up turn that it can be completely overwhelming. And if 1-2 things go wrong, their whole game plan falls apart. The game is basically going to end right after that. And that is not easy to set up, but when you do it right, it's very hard to fight against.
Yeah, that's Emperor's Children in a nutshell. It's the fact that it's so hard to play means that it's also hard to play against. And it's so fragile and it hits, so hard sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't, but then when it powers up, it gets crazy. And so I'm inclined to go 8 tier. This is not an army that's going to be oppressive, and I actually think it's going to be in the exact same spot, where I think we're going to see Emperor's Children win events, have a place in teams, not win a ton of events, and I don't think they're crossing 50% on the win rate. But I think the win rate will go up because there are just less Knight and Chaos Knight players to run into. And I think that the Votann matchup will be more tolerable than the old Knight matchup was, even though I don't think it's great.
Yeah, it'll be certainly rarer as well. It's not an army everybody can just kind of pivot to.
Yeah, there's not going to, I don't plan to go to a 50-person event and see 9 Votann players. And if I do, well, shoot. But I think that it'll still leave Emperor's Children in a net better position than before. But still, for me, that's the lower end of 8 tier.
8 tier.
8 tier. Genestealer Cult, by contrast, is an army that has changed quite a lot. They have been juggled, shuffled, redone, recycled, surged. He got me. He beat me there. But we see an army like Genestealer Cult that was very good, took real and significant nerfs, but actually got a little bit more compensatory buffs than I'm used to seeing for an army, honestly.
More than Thousand Suns fans are.
More than Thousand Suns fans have ever seen. Where we see that Genestealer Cult had Host of Ascension significantly nerfed. You get 2 stratagem changes, 1 in cost, 1 in rules. 1, the 2 CP change to critical 5s is just a nerf. The change in Return of the Shadows is, I think, a mild nerf, but much more of a side grade than an actual nerf. It's just a change.
Yep.
And then the Primus has taken what can only be described as a crowbar to the back of the knee. Both knees, actually.
That's one to hit.
Basically the same thing.
It did get a little bit cheaper, but frankly, the insane damage output of the detachment has been curtailed a bit. And additionally, points increases for some of their key units like 5-man Atalan Jackals, as well as the Achilles Ridge Runner, the solo versions. You know, their lists are going to go up a decent amount. They're not really running 10 model units that were very much buffed in points, like some of the other detachments might, which leads us to
the other detachments. We see points decreases that I think outweigh the increases. Pure Strains, Abominate, Metamorphs, all get cheaper. And Primus gets cheaper too, but that doesn't really count. And they get cheaper by actually a good margin. You know, 10 Pure Strains down 10, 10 Metamorphs down 20, Abominates down 10. This will outweigh the change for these other detachments that the Ridge Runner saw. The Ridge Runner did go up. Every detachment wants, so the Ridge Runner is just plinking, ignore cover, and +1 AP and do. But if I'm taking some Abominates and some Ridge Runners in my, Biosanctic Brood Surge, well, that's a net neutral, but I'm also taking Metamorphs, and they got cheaper. And there's some change to the Resurgence points that are going to make recycling Aberrants a little bit easier. And so all of a sudden you can say, okay, I think plan A for Genestealer Cult, the one that they spent generations on, that one is worse. But Final Day, we're going to get to some Tyranids changes as well. They don't mind those. And the changes that happened here really impact Biosanctic and Final Day the most. And so I think that it's like 2 steps backwards, 1 step forward. I think Genestealer Cult is worse than before. But they're not left listless. They're not left with nothing to do. Instead, I would say this army that was A tier before has, I think, successfully been brought down to B tier while also opening up the diversity, which to me is everything I would ask. A mono build that was A tier, and the mono build outweighed everything else. And now it's a B tier army where there are 3 detachments that I would genuinely expect to see reasonable play. And there's a 4th that I think is a fringe choice. I think Outlander Claw is still like a real thing to consider. It's a little harder to play, but the rewards are there. And so I look at that and I say, yeah, I think I am okay with Genestealer Cult being where they're at. I think it's just solidly B tier.
And Genestealer Cult, because they have a lot of units, they have the Resurgence mechanic to bring back things in the late game when both armies have smashed into each other. They all of a sudden bring in a few new units that can finish off a game, finish scoring those points. They're a very high player skill army. They offer a lot of decision points for the player as well as the opponent. And because they have this late game safety net, they can get into a trade war against pretty much any army in the game and be in a fine spot. So they're always scoring points and, kind of like Drukhari is as well. And that means they're always able to punch up. You find a couple extra better decisions here and there, you will find those extra advantages and you'll be able to pull them into the late game. Yeah. Next up, we have the Grey Knights. So Grey Knights are an army with a brand new codex. They didn't receive any direct changes here in this data slate. There was a slight wording change in Warpbane based on the old teleport strike, but otherwise their rules are the same. And 2 main playstyles have emerged since the codex released. One is Warpbane, which is basically rerolls of the army. You take Grandmasters. In Dread Knights, you take a bunch of Interceptors, a bunch of Purifiers, as well as some supporting pieces, and you do ludicrous amounts of damage. The meta shifting from big Knights, which Grandmasters are great into, but Grey Knights as a whole aren't amazing at killing very quickly, to a lot more infantry bodies, a lot more horde bodies. Purifiers do an insane amount of damage. Full reels to hit, full reels to wound. There's anti-infantry 2+ on the Purifying Flame. There's a billion Stormbolters. All of a sudden, when the meta shifts to armies where Stormbolters are effective, Grey Knights all of a sudden get a lot more impactful and powerful into those. The other playstyle is a little bit older, a little bit reminiscent of Teleport Strike, and that's Banishers. They have the newer version of Mists of Deimos, Shadow of Anarch, which allows a unit to effectively reactive move back into reserve, then rapid ingress down, and keep attacking points. So it's a very good pressure army. Instead of trying to pressure with a lot of units all at once, it's more about a scalpel, trying to pick away at the opponent and kill them, and then use that unit to go back into reserve, redo it, and kind of play a resource game where the Grey Knight player's losing nothing, the opponent's losing space on the board and also units at the same time. And it also has access to advance and charge and some other tech stratagems. Both detachments have been seen play out in the tournament scene. Grey Knights are a very elite army, and personally I lean towards the rerolls approach, like a Space Marine player, where I want the efficiency of my activations rather than the couple extra really powerful tricks. But players have been split, and I think ultimately Grey Knights are well positioned in this meta to punch above their weight class. You know, not having a lot of cheap units, especially without using Agents of the Imperium, can be very tough. You know, your strike squad 120 point unit is like the cheapest quote unquote unit that you're bringing, maybe a Razorback. You don't have a lot of screens. You don't have infiltrate. Infiltrate is a really important thing to have to make sure your opponent can't get on top of your army too quickly. And Grey Knights really do love using teleport to play the late game. They love going second. So they're a little bit off the cusp of what is typically seen in the meta as successful. They don't have a lot of resources. They don't have a lot of defense, not a lot of -1 damage. They don't have armor contempt or true silver anymore. They don't have feel no pains against dev wounds or mortals as much either. So they can die in droves if they get hit hard back in return. Grey Knights have to make sure either they're not losing many resources and trading for nothing, or they're doing a big kill turn in a single go, and that's very difficult to pull off the higher you go up the tier in experienced players. So I think they are a good army, and they punch above their weight class, but they're probably mostly going to fit in B tier because it can be hard to outplay people who have more tools because their codex offers more tools and more unit types.
Yeah, I mean, we saw going into this that we thought that Grey Knights were just a firmly cool but below average army. And I think that you're right. I think that they are climbing up. I'm happy for them to move from C to B. But I'm going to be real. I don't think they're moving to the top of B tier here. Right? I think we're going to stick more toward the bottom. The reality is that the meta is a little friendlier to them than before, but they didn't actually get any better themselves. Although I do think that with a reduction in the expectation of Knights and Chaos Knights and, you know, Death Guard in the meta, people taking less anti-tank actually does benefit Grey Knights, because at the end of the day, Grey Knights didn't like getting shot by meltguns. No. Or paying more for that Marine body, and if you get lifted by an anti-tank weapon, you just paid more than I did for an intercessor.
Yeah.
And so was a real part of the hostility to Grey Knights. I think the meta will be a little bit more favorable for 2-up saves right now, because I don't think that most of the armies that we consider to be best in the game are particularly spamming 2-up saves. And Grey Knights are one of those things where you don't have a lot of options. If the meta is hostile, you don't pivot to your plan, your alternative build. You're not going to build something that's not taking 2-up saves. Right? Is when the meta is hostile to Knights, or when the meta is hostile to 3-wound infantry, I don't stop taking Armigers in my Knights. I don't stop taking Custodians in my Custodian army. When the meta is hostile to a low datasheet count army where everything looks the same, it just is worse. Yeah. And I think it's a little better for Grey Knights. So I hope to see them get closer to the midline. This is one that I'm optimistic about. I think we're right about, but they haven't been here so far, and so we're gonna have to see the results on this one. But I'm crossing my fingers. I think there's enough power there. Grey Knights should be better.
If you watch a turn of Warpbane just activating on an opponent's army, it is nutty amounts of damage, especially when you add in the charges. But you have to set that up properly, and it is not easy to do. So I think B tier is a safe bet for now for the Grey Knights, and I'm excited to see if they can punch up above that.
Very good. Up next are Imperial Agents.
Wait, I've never heard of this army.
Okay, I didn't realize you had started to work with the Names Workshop, Richard. I'm doing 2 jobs already. Codex Imperial Agents, yes, Codex. It's in such a weird place. It's by far the smallest represented army in the game. And objectively, it does have the highest win rate in the game. But I don't think it counts. I don't think it counts. If 4 people go 3-2, you have a 60% win rate. And that's better than what Death Guard has. But between you and me, I don't think we think Agents is better than Death Guard. I don't think you think that. And I know it's not true. Imperial Agents it's another mono-style list. I think you really are just, Imperialis Fleet? Yeah. And you have a lot of infantry, and you can jail people. And I got to tell you, jail strategies have gotten better, not worse, with the demise of Challenger cards. Rest in peace. But they are still just an infantry jail list. And the damage caps out somewhere in between, I don't know, like a Predator battle tank and literally anything tougher than a Predator battle tank. You can surprise people. You can kill more Predator battle tanks than people expect when they're on an objective. But after that, it's just not that much damage. And so I really feel like Imperial Agents is not a complete faction.
Yep.
Honestly. You have a mono build. Some people can play this mono build very well by practicing it, and I think heavily relying on the fact that 4 out of 5 opponents you see at a GT are going to be like, I don't know, what do you do? I've never played against agents. And you're going to tell them honestly, and they're going to not really process that because it's a bunch of new things at once, and they're going to walk face first into every single rake that you laid in front of them. It doesn't matter that you told them it was there. That is great, and that is a great way to win more than half of your games, and that is a very bad way to win a tournament. And that is why we are not seeing Imperial Agents win tournaments.
It's a mono-dimensional build that at the end of the day doesn't really have the tools to punch up into a meta as it shifts. And if we look, what we've been talking about is big knight chassis, durable things are coming down a bit. More bodies, more control armies are coming up towards the top. Those armies are better at the style than agents are. If you're going to tell me that agents are better than AdMech at controlling a board, I'm going to laugh in your face.
No,
Sky Stalkers are better than everything in the Imperial Agents Codex, period. So, sorry, Imperial Agents players. I didn't mean to be this harsh, but I didn't come in with that. I didn't come in to be this harsh, but they do that style well, and it is a counter meta style, but as soon as the meta becomes more oriented towards control, they are not one of the best armies at doing it, in my opinion. I'd rather have Drukhari. I would rather have AdMech. I would rather have some of these other armies. And so what is their role? What are you playing it for besides loving agents? It's kind of that at the end of the day, and I don't think that's enough to do well.
Yeah, and that's completely fine if that's why you're doing it. If you're playing
100%.
agents because you're a memer and a dreamer, rock on.
Play whatever you want. This tier list doesn't matter for you. Just play whatever you want.
But like honestly, like if you're running the challenge of like, I want to see if I can win a local less than 50 person GT with agents, rock on. But this play style that we mentioned has a tough time punching up into the good armies, also has a tough time punching up into the good players. Because the good players are going to ask enough questions, they're going to remember what you tell them. Right? Like you can tell every one of your opponents, yeah, if you shoot me, I have a 4-pin and I move. And then they'll shoot you and you're going to say, cool, I'm going to pop 4-pin and I move. And they'll say, okay, and then you're going to move. And then they're going to be like, oh, wait. Somehow that's always where it clicks. It's not going to happen against good players. It's not going to punch up.
They're going to be ready. They're going to be, okay, you're probably going to move here. I'm going to set up to interact.
The best agents player in the world against the best pick a faction player in the world. I'm not betting on agents. Ever.
I'm the best agent player in the world, John. And going to ways with agents.
Maybe you are, dude. If you beat me with agents at Worlds, I will probably just retire from 40K. I will be our model painter and I'll learn editing.
There's the incentive right there.
Well, absolutely. I'll stay employed if you'll have me, but you could also fire me and I wouldn't leave me an audio.
I believe that is in
the clause. Yeah, I take a half cut of my pay. Agents are going in D tier.
I'm sorry, agents.
I'm sorry.
Bottom of the game.
I don't care that the win rate is higher than that. I have a lot of respect for agents players who are willing to try and make it work, but the army does not have punch up ability to win a tournament in the way that every other army has. Even demons, which are so far the lowest army we have ranked. Demons have more punch up and beat up a good army or good player more than agents do. You're just not a complete army, unfortunately. And so when you run into your limits, that's tough. And hey, if you manage to hit only and exclusively top Eldar and Drukhari players on your way to the top that have not yet played against agents, and you manage to dodge all of the other players who have played against agents and all of the Ork players, you can win that GT. And I'm sure agents are going to win a GT in the next 3 months. And I'm sure I'm going to get tagged that they won the... I was about to say something of oh, and then they win the Victoria Underbrush Australia 2020 closed invitational. And I'm going to be like, okay. But even then, I don't believe that. I don't believe it. Prove me wrong, internet. And then like and comment.
Next up, we have Imperial Knights, another army near and dear to your heart, and they just received a new codex, and the codex got some changes in the balanced data slate, specifically to the Valor Strike detachment, so that you can't simply pick 3 knights, including Canis, and make a stratagem free for 3 knights.
Yeah, fair enough.
Pretty crazy. They made it down to only 1 knight, which is a lot more reasonable, but it is a relatively significant nerf to a good detachment.
I need a neck brace for this whiplash. I mean, knights went from oppressive broken 6 weeks ago to big nerf, now they're good. Then they get a codex preview, and they're oppressive broken, even though we haven't played any games with it, and even though the games that we played, they lost. Worst army in the game, ruining Warhammer. And then they get nerfed again, and now they're bad?
They're all over the map.
I don't know. This is difficult because, one, I have no concept of where knights are right now because it has been up, down, in like a 5-week period. They've changed 4 times. And I've played against the new Knight Codex, and I've watched games against the new Knight Codex, and I've read through the new Knight Codex thoroughly, but we haven't seen any results yet. Valor Strike was what we thought was day one going to be the most oppressive build for Knights, but I do believe that other detachments had more strength to express player skill than Valor Strike did. Like Questor's Companions. I still believe that's true, but I think that the combination of the points nerfs, and I think that the Feel No Pain and the durability loss by going not Valor Strike. Because Valor Strike, you have Rotate and not a Feel No Pain, whereas in the Index Noble Lance, you had to Rotate and a Feel No Pain. Now you have Rotate, not a Feel No Pain, and that Feel No Pain, it turns out, was actually pretty important. And now we switched attachments because Valor Strike got nerfed, and now we don't have Rotate or a Feel No Pain. And all of a sudden, I'm looking down, I'm realizing, boy, this army is not what I played against 6 weeks ago. I don't want to tell you it's worse, but like, it's not the same. And so now I look at this and I'm struggling with where to put knights. I think that they are going to have similar problems to Chaos Knights, slightly lower, but then they don't have the same strengths, where you don't have that same volume. You don't have the singular grace that is the Chaos Knight Despoiler. The Defender is amazing, but it is expensive. And this is not an army that could afford to cut a resource to get a piece in. And you are more fragile because you can't flex into the Feel No Pain the way that Infernal Lance can. And Infernal Lance is also the best attachment and has the Rotate. But I think that the new best attachments don't have the Rotate. And you rely more on the Armigers because you need the Armigers to play around you. But your Armigers aren't as good as War Dogs are. That's weird. Now, you are more reliable than Chaos Knights because you have a hit and wound reroll because, I'm sorry, we have walked around, done a dance, spun our head, and end up in the exact same spot where you always choose a reroll hit and a wound roll because it turns out that's the most important part of Warhammer.
You need to do some damage.
If you can't do damage, we always talk about how movement wins games. Yeah, to be clear, that's after you're able to do damage. If you can't do damage, it doesn't matter. And so net, I think Knights are worse than before, but not by much. Yeah. And I think that the Codex is going to unlock more builds, and I think that once people play with it and the meta stops being just pure aggro against every Titanic vehicle you can think of, I think Knights will be perfectly fine. But I don't think that they were as broken as everyone thought with Valor Strike, and I think that a day one nerf before games are played is really cutting the wind out of their sails, and I think that they're just going to be B tier.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of the most oppressive things people had played against, the multiple Atropos, the Canis with his original form, as well as the potential of these new Codex detachments getting nerfed, specifically Valor Strike, really ultimately is going to restrict them back to being a normal army that plays normal 40k for the most part. And there's some things that they can do that are a bit better than before, but the whole package that you get isn't quite as oppressive in combination as it was previously, and so I think B tier is a fine place to put them for now.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to measure, but I feel like that's right. I would not be surprised if they ended up lower. I think they're going to be perfectly fine win rate, they're going to win some events. They're not that bad or anything, but I just think that the meta didn't properly grasp how much the Knight nerf mattered, and we went straight from they are broken because they're too cheap to now they're costed more appropriately, but I haven't played games against them, to now I'm reading scans of this codex on Reddit. Because genuinely, like, the codex was online on the internet. It feels like 10 days after, maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, right after the points changes. And so you didn't even see events with, like, the in-between.
Yeah.
to see how much Knights dropped. It was, we all remember Knights are broken. These rules look broken. Fair enough. But I think we'll find that that wasn't actually true. So, D tier for Knights.
Now we have the Leagues of Votann, another brand new codex. It really hasn't had the time to shine yet, with its codex release being relatively recent, but it's started to put up some results, and it has a few different playstyles. Now, the balanced Dataslate nerfed what I thought was the strongest style, which is going to be the Brandfast Oathband, where the secure position stratagem allowed at the end of any phase for a Votann unit to disembark wholly within 6 of a transport. Allowing primary swings and all sorts of crazy plays, it's restricted now to the Votann players' end of one of their phases instead of simply end of any phase. So some of the shenanigans get restricted. You also can't charge after using it, which was a loophole in the core rules. It's much more reasonable. It's still strong. The detach rule, the sustained, is also incredible in my opinion. I personally believe that that attachment is still strong. I believe the Delve Assault Shift, Need Guard, as well as some of the other ones, Hearthband and the Persecution Prospect coming up as well. Votann has multiple really strong playstyles, and it's upheld by a large suite of data sheets that are quite good overall. The internal balance in the Votann Codex is quite strong. There's a lot of different viability for whether you want to go a combat or shooting-oriented style or a combined arms approach. And I believe things like the Landfort, some of the Steeljack profiles, the Warriors and the Grimnir combos, the Capricus and the Jaegers, the Thunderkin, of course. There's a lot of just really strong core units that you're going to see in a lot of different lists, and then you build around the edges what you want to allow you to outplay the matchups you expect to see. And for me personally, I've been playing a lot of games with the Votann. I think the ability to generate yield points is very easy for most armies, and so if you want to lean heavier on that -1 to wound if strength is greater for your non-vehicles, you can. And that -1 to wound is brutal for a lot of armies out there. Easy access to the Armor of Contempt in Need Guard can also stack on all these 2-up save units. Like the Landfort is quite difficult to deal with for a lot of armies and is a better consistent shooting platform than it was previously. I think Votann are in an excellent spot overall. They have all the tools, more so than previously. They kind of had one main style, which had like 3 units that you built around, and everything else was kind of support. Now you can really decide, do you want to go for the big Hearthguard unit? Do you want to go for many Thunderkin units? Do you want to go super transport heavy, trash heavy? Whatever you want to do, you can do. And with that level of flexibility, in addition, detachments that play in very different ways, Votann is much more of a player skill army than it was previously. Previously, it was very stats-oriented and playstyle-oriented. Now, I believe the decision-making process is a lot more complex for what you do with Votann, and I think that's going to elevate Votann more from what we considered like an even 40k army to a, wow, this army is, you have to be prepared to play against this army. It's not, even though you can pre-measure it, there's not too many ways to advance and do things in most detachments. It has a lot more going on, a lot more trickery, and that's going to allow expert players to get even more out of it than previously. I'm very excited for this book.
Yeah, I think you should be. That's the main thing you mentioned is that there's a lot more trickery, there's a lot more decisions, there's a lot more plays. And that's what we look for in a good army, is that the good army is there to channel the player's ability to win 40k. The army does not win many games of 40k. It can lose you some, don't get me wrong. But most of the time it's the player who's doing the winning and losing. And Votann is much more, I think, giving you options. And so I'm excited to see that. I don't have a great grasp yet of where Votann is going to land power-wise. I certainly agree with you. I believe it's a strong army. I believe it's an above-average army. I couldn't tell you if it has a good World Leaders matchup and a bad Orc matchup, or if it's even into Eldar. We'll figure that out, or you'll figure that out and I'll watch. But for now, I look at it. There's clear power. There are multiple options. This is more than what Votann has had in the past, and I'm happy with A tier.
Yeah, I think they fit really naturally into A tier, and it's going to be an army you're going to have to learn what it does and how to play against it, because it's going to be quite popular towards the top end of tournaments, I think.
Indeed. So the next army for us to discuss is the Necrons.
Oh, the old Necrons, a classic of mine. I love the models being able to reanimate and heal back, and I've been playing quite a bit of Necrons throughout this year, mostly with the Star Shatter arsenal, which I believe is one of the strongest ways to play Necrons. Really revolving around -1 damage Silent King, Wraith Blobs, which had gone down in points earlier in the year. They're now appropriately costed for a durable, relatively fast, and annoying to deal with unit with good OC. And the core of Silent King plus double Wraith units, 2 DDAs, and then stuff supporting that is one of the better archetypes for Necrons. The other main one that you see is Awakened Dynasty, and you either see it very heavy on Wraiths and Warriors, trying to go for that controlled durability aspect and just put too many wounds in your opponent's face, or you see a more kind of all-over approach where you have a couple Doomsday Arcs, you have a couple brick units, maybe only 1 or 2, and then you have a lot of MSU elements, so things like possibly some Destroyers, or you go for the Scorpec Destroyers, and all of these can play in a very strong manner, but I think the lack of consistent damage output from Awakened is outweighed by the consistent damage output and the durability of Star Shatter, so I think that's still the best build. The Silent King nerf is pretty significant. Ignore Mods was one of the single best auras in the entire game, one of probably the best, and so being able to ignore basically everything dangerous, a minus damage, -1 to hit, -1 to wound, manipulation to your OC or movement, all that was very impactful. And Necrons are an army that has never been one of the highest damage output armies. Even during the teleporting days, it wasn't about the fact that they would, kill you in a single turn. It was the fact that they would do an amount of damage, survive, and teleport again and do it again and again and again. And that's all Necrons is. You have to have your damage output survive for multiple turns, and you have to get efficient activations out of them. And Star Shatter does that best, but the loss of Ignore Mods means it's going to be that much less consistent than it was, and even minor margins like that can mean a huge difference for Necrons. So I think they're a bit worse than before. Personally, for me, they were an A tier army previously, and I think they more naturally fit in the B tier now. They're still a good army, they still have tools, but their game plan is very linear. It's I go out on the objectives, I say, how much are you going to put there? Are you going to out-OC me, or are you going to try and kill me? And you just play, you let your opponent interact with you on their terms, and you wait and see what they do. And it's a very reactive, it's a very slow army, and oftentimes the player's skill comes in your positioning and your model movement, more so than in the trickery that you're pulling off as much.
I completely agree with you. And I think that the Silent King change, it's one where I could see it actually being a mild buff for Awakened Dynasties.
Possibly.
Where the +2 move, if you're running these Scorpec bricks, more this combat, that can actually be very impactful because it can change what you do. But net result, down to B tier, feels like a pretty safe place to put them. They're not bad at all, but I see the shift in the meta as well as this adjustment to the Silent King being a net point against them. I think that the shift in the meta where we're looking at more other armies that are trying to do board control, I think it kind of pushes them out a little bit because the strength of Necrons was that they're one of the few board control armies that could play against some of the top dogs out there and still score points.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's less true. Maybe taking that 20-man warrior brick is no longer working as often as it did. And Necrons continue to not have great fallbacks when their main gimmick falls flat.
Absolutely.
And nothing is fixing that with this +2 move aura.
No, absolutely. It does help Wraiths do more flyover mortals or helps your warriors get to objectives when they otherwise wouldn't. But it's a minor buff that helps your consistency and movement, but it doesn't help the overall game plan of making sure that you survive long enough to score the points you need to and get an advantage and win the game that way. So I still like Necrons. I still think they're a strong army, but they aren't going to be as consistently towards the top in this meta, I think. If we're thinking about a 20-man boys unit, for instance, which we'll get to soon, if you're able to kill that unit with the Pain Boy and all the stuff in there, you're probably tailored to deal with Necron warriors as well. And so Awakened might end up falling a little bit more victim in this coming meta than the previous one because volume of attacks, things like 10 Purifiers and Grey Knights, yikes, that's a lot of damage coming at you.
A lot of damage.
So I'm a little bit nervous for the Awakened style with the meta shift, and then I think the Star Shatter style is still strong, but it's just a bit less efficient than it was, and that could be a big difference in this meta.
I agree. Up next are the Orks. Orks are wog indeed, Mr. Bond. We're seeing Orks be one of those factions that really did get changes that fundamentally changed them. They were suffering. It's fair to say. And their changes, I think, are quite impactful. We see a couple of points changes, which will influence some builds more than others. I think Bully Boys is probably the most impacted. Mm-hmm. I think that the meta is changing in directions that are generally favorable for them. I think that it'll even unlock some of the older builds that got buffs but weren't seen much, like Speed Freaks. But then we see the changes around Ghazghkull and Commandos, giving Orks fundamentally different options than what they had before. We now have cheap infiltrating units so that if you go second and lose them, you're not immediately sad. Splitting a commando squad from 10 to 5 and then paying half the cost, you had to take the second half, but that's fine, right? Eldar Rangers would still be good if you could only buy an even number of them, which is all that commandos are now. It's, if you buy an even number of my cheap infiltrating units that actually hit very reasonably and are relatively tough in the context of 60 points. And so a new element of Orks, they love not getting jailed because they want to jail you. Yes. Infiltrators help that a lot. Infiltrators that are worth the cost, because if you skimped and didn't take the infiltrators, then you got infiltrated upon and jailed yourself. Your non-flying army was just a battle round behind. Massive change. Ghazghkull can now join boys and Meganobs and Breakaboys. What's that? Doesn't say Breakaboys. I know it doesn't say Breakaboys, but Breakaboys say that if you can join boys, you can join them. So he got 3 units he can join. And, whoa, all of a sudden, that's pretty good. So him in a boys squad or a knob squad, I think is fantastic. And he can get in a battle wagon now. So now your hardest hitting melee character, who is the centerpiece of the army, and frankly, I think now is approaching auto take. He now can join more units and can go in transports. Fundamental shift. Yeah. If you told me that Fulgrim could join Infractors and get in a Rhino, I would be thinking differently about him. That's what Ghazghkull just got.
What was his old transport capacity? It was like 14 or something?
He took up 20 spots.
20 spots, more insane.
I believe the way that it worked was I think like a Gaz and like, it was like Ghazghkull and Makari could fit if they weren't leading something, which is not the same. Maybe it was 18. Maybe you could join him to 2 Meganobs that could join. It wasn't real. Now he can join a lot more ablative wounds. He can give a different unit his buff of a crit 5s +1 to hit and wound, which is crazy on a boy squad. Insane. The boy squads hit hard until they find something that's too tough and they do 0 damage. It's a very weird thing with boy squads. That doesn't exist anymore. +1 hit, +1 wound. If you're in a Warhorde, sustained hits, critical 5s, lethal hits. Nothing is too tough for that. Nothing is tough enough to be happy by getting hit by that. And so we are introducing a hammer that can be delivered more easily. Now you can get a leader with Gaz, because the only way you can double lead is in a boy squad. And so that means that for the first time you can double lead Gaz's unit, which means for the first time you can put an enhancement on Gaz's unit. So all of a sudden, Gaz can join a faster unit in a transport with another character that makes them faster, with an enhancement that makes them faster. And Gaz, again, the centerpiece of the army, is suddenly like, when you add these buffs, they're not additive. They stack, like they double, they multiply upon themselves. And so we have taken an army that was just fundamentally falling short of the line, and we have pushed it across the line. But Orks are big and heavy, and when you move it, it falls hard. So I think Orks have gone from I have fallen short too hard to I am on the other side of the wall too hard.
Yeah, I don't think you can underestimate how powerful the Commandos changes is. One of those huge weaknesses of Orks was they just get stopped in their tracks in their deployment zone. So all those trucks and battle wagons just cannot move up the table. And if they're stuck back there, not attacking primary, the Ork player just isn't doing very much of anything. Now they can at least stop that on one side of the board, have an area to move up into, and start attacking objectives immediately. And then, we've been talking about counter meta. If the meta switches to more bodies, Orks being one of them, armies like Aeldari that are really tuned to killing vehicles with their fire dragons or killing elite infantry, all of a sudden either have to pivot their lists, which makes them weaker into other targets, or they keep the same thing and they just have these counters that exist out there. I think Orks fit into that mold very well, and Orks love the loss of Challenger cards. Challenger cards being gone is huge for a style that wants to get up on the objectives, throw the boys past the objectives into your half, and leave trucks and nonsense on the objectives, scoring them. You gonna deal with this truck when there's 40, 60 boys in your face? Probably not. So if they get a big score lead, get 45 primary by turn 3, you're like, okay, well, I have a huge thing. I have to table them right now to try and win this game.
I suppose I think I actually need to clarify that you don't get everything I said at the same time, because if you do double leading a Gaz unit, you don't get in the battle wagon.
Yes.
Still, 20 boys with character and Gaz giving enhancement on foot, much scarier than before, or just 10 and Gaz in a battle wagon, or Knobs and Gaz in a battle wagon, or Knobs, or like
Brave a lot of options before.
so many options. And so lots of love for Orks. They earned it. You know, they certainly spent a couple months in jail after being repeatedly broken. But they are right back with a vengeance. And I do really expect that we're going to find out that a lot of Orks' past troubles were as much faction abandonment as actual weaknesses. I think Orks are right back into a top position.
Absolutely. I think A tier is going to be pretty natural home for them. And if you are not prepared for Orks, if you haven't been thinking about Orks for a while, start thinking about them right now.
Let's talk about Space Marines. The old Adeptus Astartes. I'm a homer for Space Marines. When people say Space Marines are bad, I disagree with them.
He's proven it wrong.
Space Marines, I think, are phenomenal. I think that Space Marines actually just have been good this whole time. We've got multiple builds, and they are, it seems, introducing new builds on the daily for us. But I will say that I think there's been a little bit of a conversation about whether or not these new detachments that we're seeing dropped are supposed to get +1 to wound from Oath of Moment. At the time we're recording this has not been clarified, but I'm going to tell you that I believe it is clear and obvious to me that these detachments are intended to get +1 to wound from Oath of Moment.
They're Codex chapters.
These detachments are listed under the Space Marine section of the Munitorum Field Manual. I'm sorry that they did not reprint the FAQ when they should have. They should have. But someone forgot, and that's okay. Only humans. But I am doing this under the conversation and under the assumption that they're supposed to be +1 to wound if you take this new Shadow Mark or Forge Father Seekers or Shield the Emperor and whatever Iron Hands are going to get. That one too. So I think Space Marines are fantastic. What defines the good army for me was we've talked about armies that have power, have advantages over other factions. You have that ability to win tournaments, and you also have that ability for a top player to take you and do well with. Space Marines check every box, then tear the paper in half and throw it at you. Like, with ease. Space Marines do everything. I acknowledge Space Marines can be hard to play. It's harder than you think. By the way, if you're a not Space Marine player at home who's laughing at me because Space Marines are easy to play, go ahead and try it real quick. But seriously, Space Marines are so good when you get it right. And the fact that they can be a little bit punishing to play means that you need to get it right. But when you do, crazy power levels in Space Marines right now. I genuinely believe that Ultramarines are still one of the best armies in the game. The faction got abandoned, but I think it was abandonment, not the army wasn't good enough. I think that we've got 2 of these 3 detachments we've seen so far, both Forge Father Seekers and Shadow Mark Talon, I think are genuinely real strong detachments. Like, again, we're seeing, Shadow Mark is like an evolution of the old Vanguard. That list was hard to play, but multiple players were able to take it to success. I really expect to see Space Marines continue to be where they are right now, which is an army that has a mediocre win rate, held down by the burden of being the most popular army in the game, and they put up plenty of event results, plenty of top finishes, plenty of event wins. I think Space Marines are in the exact same spot, but they keep giving us new tools to do it. And what that means is that the most popular army in the game is somehow not stale to play against. Because when the most popular army in the game is like, oh yeah, this is my 27th game into Ultramarines Gladius this month. Let's go ahead and play. I know where this is going. Not so fast, my friend. Have you played against Forge Father Seekers yet? Have you played against Shadow Mark Talon yet? They're different. And by the way, Ultramarines are still around. And you know what? We got 3 new Ultramarine kits on the way. So let's go ahead and assume that they're going to be here for a while too.
Yeah. Within Ultramarines, the Gladius version is very different from Stormlands. Very different from Ironstorm if you still see that. But as a whole, Space Marines are the full toolkit. They have been this edition. They have so many data sheets. All their detachments, or their most competitive detachments, have a lot of different options for what you want to do. They have a more fallback and do stuff access than most armies do in the game. And that allows you to continually use your elite resources in the way that you need to. It's not an easy army to tie up and stop it from doing things. And I think that's one of the main reasons why it's such a player skill oriented army. If you lean that direction, and you're able to take advantage of, your opponent tried to do this, well, here's the counterplay to it. Space Marines are very much I have a tool for whatever you're trying to do, I can counter it with this. And as soon as you don't have those tools, Space Marines do become a poor army, in my opinion. Which there are detachments that are poor for Space Marines, but there are plenty that are very, very good. And I expect them to be at the top of the meta for the coming months. And we're heading into Worlds time. Space Marines, of course, they're going to be good.
Yep. I'm with you. Space Marines, strong army. Not only do I think they're A tier, I think they're upper A tier. I think they belong at the top.
I think they're right there next to Eldar.
Yeah, it's just the diversity of options gives a very strong player the ability to tailor pick what they want to do. And that's massive. I'm going to be honest, I don't have a ton of list building creation with like what I'm going to do with Emperor Shillen and Guard. I picked the army because of the play style and I'm playing it. Space Marines, I can pick up Space Marines and then I get to make every choice in the book still. And then I get to play on the tabletop where I get to make every choice in the book still if I chose one of the 5 super flexible detachments that are available to me. Space Marines are the best.
But option overwhelm is one of the reasons it is held down, for sure.
Yeah, there are wrong choices as well.
Several.
And they try to trick you into it. You can do exactly what they tell you, which is play Stormlance and put mounted units in it. I hate having to explain to a new player. Yeah. Like, hey, I know you're reading the mounted detachment. You're going to put mounted units in it. You're wrong. Sorry. You don't do that. Oh, the sneaky boy detachment, the sneaky beakies. Yeah, we're going to cut every Phobos unit, replace it with the slowest infantry I can muster. That's how it works, baby. I'm all aboard Space Marines and A2 here. I really firmly believe this. I think they've been in A tier for the past like 18 months.
Awesome. Space Marines A tier. You heard it here
first.
first.
Marines A tier, folks.
Next up, we have the Space Wolves, another Astartes chapter here. They got their codex several months ago, and they've been doing some pretty nasty things across the summer. However, once the Knights and Death Guard really started to grab hold of the meta, Space Wolves had an awkward time. If you were playing the Gladius build, you didn't have, the excellent damage enhancement to really go into those type of targets. You could go for Saga the Beastslayer, but then you lack speed in certain dimensions. You could get the speed by going Stormlance, but then some of the choices that you make don't fully synergize with what that detachment's trying to do. And so Space Wolves are in kind of an awkward position. They just got a bunch of points increases on some of their key units in the latest balanced data slate. And with Space Marines getting some new detachments, like we mentioned, there's more competition than ever before for a Space Marine style list. Now, Space Wolves do have those options. I think Stormlance, the Gladius, and the Saga the Beastslayer detachments are all competitive for Space Wolves. And even though they got points increases, it's not a massive nerf to the army. It's not dropping them out of the meta as a whole, but it is restricting their options. And Space Marines, because they're an elite army, they don't have a lot to cut around. You start cutting core units, and all of a sudden you have that one less damage resource that was needed to make sure that you got an edge in this matchup. So because of these issues, even though Space Wolves, I think, are still a good faction overall, I think they punch up into the top tier a little bit worse than before, having those less resources and having extra competition in Space Marines as a whole. So I think they fit a bit more in the B tier. They're a good army. They have good tools. Wolfguard Terminator is very good. Ragnar with his Bloodclaw unit, excellent resource. They have their own version of kind of Blade Guard and elite infantry unit with their Wolfguard Head Takers. They have good options, but they are relatively monodimensional in that they're trying to hit you hard. And I think the armies towards the top of Space Marines do that a little bit better, either with supreme shooting or with the combat consistency of Black Templars.
Yeah, and the dimensions of Space Wolves that are unique still exist, like Thunderwolf Cav. And so Space Wolves, I would say more than Dark Angels, have that reason to play Space Wolves. They've got that part locked down.
Their characters are excellent.
The characters are excellent. They have enough unique factors, but I don't think the Slayer detachment is head and shoulders above the Space Marine Codex detachments. And then with these points changes, it feels like they didn't have the breathing room to take 50 points off. And so now I just look at it as you're close to Space Marines, but you're a little bit lower. And that unique aspect you bring of I have a good mounted unit doesn't feel unique because there's going to be a lot of move blocking armies out there. Again, there's going to be a lot of jail and trash. And this is a great jail army, but it also gets jailed. When you're a non-flying jail army and you're looking like, oh man, the Orks are the Space Wolves, boy, does that first turn matter a lot. And I think I like Orks a little bit better at punching into the rest of the field.
Yeah, and if we look at one of their best resources is Logan, the ability to come down turn 1 and put pressure on your opponent's objectives. That used to come with the downside of challenger cards. But because it doesn't, if you are able to get those advantages, Space Wolves are still good at putting pressure on objectives. So like we said, it's not that Space Wolves are bad. They have a bit more competition than before, but I think they're just a good army now. and fit into B tier.
I think so.
Coming up next, and it's very synergistic here with Space Wolves before them, is the Thousand Sons, their arch nemesis. So Thousand Sons were one of the better armies in the game. They had insane damage output, a lot of consistency, and some very, very good cheap units for a Marine-style army. But in the latest update, they received quite a few nerfs, a couple buffs, but mostly nerfs, one of which is their ability to only attempt each spell of their army rule once now. They can't just redo it in case they fail, so their consistency in getting their best buffs is going to be significantly lessened. In addition, they got a lot of points increases to pretty much every key unit that they use. Their cheap units, their durable units, their core units, all of them went up some amount. So a lot of lists are looking at easily going up over 100 points, if not more than that. And because of that, it's already a fairly elite army. What are you cutting? Are you cutting their damage output? They kind of need that to make sure that they kill things and that they can play out a longer game. You're cutting their cheap stuff. They don't have the screens anymore. They never want to get hit first. So I think Thousand Sons are going to be in a relatively rough spot compared to where they were previously. The Terminator build, which was their most successful build in the last couple months, did get a points decrease on the 10 model Terminator unit, the Scarab Cults, and also got a buff to the Terminator Sorcerer. So there's some nice compensation there, but it's nowhere near enough for all styles. And I think ultimately the Grand Coven style will still end up being the strongest way to play Thousand Sons. But instead of nerfing that style directly and buffing other ones, they nerfed Thousand Sons the army, and there's not compensation for some of the other detachments that really did need a boost compared to Grand Coven. Which was, I think, the main outlier in terms of oppressive damage output.
Yeah. What stands out to me with Thousand Sons is that change. The points are rough, don't get me wrong. It's that change where you can only attempt each spell once. And that puts a massive priority on being able to pass your spell, because at the end of the day, if you fail, if you set up a play to make a double move, and if you just roll Snake Eyes and you just fail it, only Grand Coven has a unique stratagem to re-roll the cast. And that now means that every other detachment is much less reliable. So you relatively nerfed them. Because if you're not using your army rule, you are paying too much for a tactical marine.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're locked into Grand Coven, and you're CP hungrier. And you're a lot less likely to upcast your spells. Because now if you roll the midcast, are you going to spend a command point to reroll a midcast double move in the hopes that you don't accidentally fail it? Because if you do, you don't move at all? Rough. I mean, a Doombolt or an AP buff, yeah, I'd prefer +2 AP, but I'll take +1 AP. Yeah, I'd prefer D3+3 mortals, but I'll take D3 mortals. But if I'm going to double move and I fail it, red alarm bells go off. I have to spend a command point. If you fail it twice in a row, go to bed. Oh my God. And if you do anything else, you're just locked into Coven, and you don't have as many command points as before, and there is no free strat generation at all in Thousand Sons.
Mm-hmm.
And that's already the CP hungriest detachment.
I'm thinking this might be the steepest decline of any of the factions in this meta from the previous tier list that we've done. I could easily see them dropping down to that C tier category where, yes, they can still put out quite a bit of damage, but the consistency factor on elite bodies isn't there, and the less trash that they might end up running in their lists means that more opponents will be able to be able to hit them first. Also, their ability to kind of play off of primary and play a waiting game is worse because challenger cards has disappeared. They do have to interact with the objectives, whether the Vortex Beasts or, the different Zangor units. What are you cutting that's going to stand on these objectives? It's not the rubrics. It's not some of the other core units. It's not an easy decision. I think Thousand Sons are going to have difficult list design decision and also different play decisions because of the inconsistency of their army rule now.
100%. So C tier to me feels very appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Tyranids. Tyranids. Tyranids are an army that got a very nice detachment a couple months ago with Subterranean Assault. In this balanced Dataslate, they don't really... They get some decreases in points. You're looking at a normal tiered list getting 20 to 40 points depending on the way that you build it. If you go out of your way, you're getting like 40 to 50 points back. It's very hard to build a list that gained more than 40 to 50 points.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice, but it is not by any stretch of the imagination the same as the buff that like Orks got. And Tyranids before were in a perfectly fine spot. Their win rate is normal, their event wins are kind of low. And I think that they really haven't changed much. 40 more points, same as Custodes. 30 to 40 more points is, I'll promote one of my trash pieces to a better trash piece. I'll promote a lone operative to a fancier lone operative. My Lictor's now Death Leaper. That's kind of what Tyranids got. And that doesn't feel like it's really moving the needle. Tyranids have traditionally had a problem with damage output in 10th edition, where they're not very reliable damage army, and when they hit that higher durability, especially because they normally solve their damage problems with volume, volume is a great way to solve, I need to kill these 5 intercessors. It's not a great way to try to kill a knight. I'm like, I'm just going to try more times to wound you on 5s with my 3 damage, and you're like, wow, you're just not getting there. And so you really run into a problem with Tyranids where you don't get around the stat check meta that was. And so I think Tyranids are a little bit better off than before, because Tyranids, used to really hate the Knights and Chaos Knights game. They didn't love the Death Guard game either. All those armies going down, the armies that are replacing them, I think are ones that Tyranids can play against. But the fact remains that Tyranids are relatively not happy with the lack of challenger cards, actually, because Subterranean Assault, if someone just runs forward and pushes you far back, you just said, now I'm going to drop on you, kill you, and get challenger cards. And now you can play the more aggressive primary style and say, I'm going to be denying you early, and now you don't draw challenger cards, and that's that's better for Tyranids. But you're just not doing that style as well as 4 or 5 other armies that are doing it right now. And if you're in direct competition with them, when you're playing against them, I don't think you're going to do it as well as they are. Mm-hmm. And so you just end up in a really weird place where I think Tyranids are a little bit too inconsistent, and they don't give enough choices to the operating player, where it's not as flexible as some of the armies like Emperor's Children or Space Marines, and you're not as dynamic, and your one dynamic detachment is Subterranean Assault, which is a very good trick, but it's very much that entire detachment is, I have sacrificed everything for 6-inch deep strike and charge, because I have nothing behind it.
Reroll ones do.
The detachment rule is fantastic. The 6 stratagems boil down to, and now I use my detachment rule. I can get an ignores cover, and I can put people into reserves to use the detachment rule again. And that's kind of all you're doing.
It feels like Tyranids should benefit from Knights coming down a bit overall, because those were probably some of their toughest matchups. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you're mentioning there's other aggressive jail-type armies. Tyranids don't necessarily appreciate that.
Yeah. I think that, if I'm making a prediction, which I am, I'm going to say that Tyranids go up 2% on win rate, and their event wins go from 0 to 2. Maybe 1. It's still not going to be breaking through to the top. Subterranean Assault is still a good detachment, but it's not a great one, and it just doesn't run the gauntlet very reliably at all. And I think we're reaching the point where other armies are now flexible enough as we get to this later stage of the edition, where it's not just be a top player, outplay people with Tyranids profit, because it's getting harder and harder to outplay people as more people get tools, while we are stuck with the index tools that got reprinted in the first Codex of the edition. And so it's a little unfortunate, but for me, I do actually think Tyranids are going to fall down to C tier. They're on the line for me. I could see them in B tier, but I think C is a little bit more realistic at the moment.
All right, then we have the Tau Empire here. So in the previous balanced Dataslate in the summer, they got a significant change to their army rule, making the army significantly easier to actually play for the average player. A lot less bookkeeping, a lot more consistency in getting access to rerolls for a lot of the army. However, ultimately that change hasn't made quite the impact I think Games Workshop thought that it was going to make. It certainly made the army easier to play, but it didn't make it a winning tournament army for the most part. And the reasons for that is fundamentally Tau's 2 most difficult problems are, number 1, being able to attack enemy staging points behind terrain, being effectively forced to have your observers there to make sure that your damage dealers do enough damage is still not that easy, especially ones with the rerolls. And on top of that, Tau don't really use the charge phase that well. You can charge things in like Riptides and stuff, and I do it, but fight first, heroic interventions, really the change from 2 CP to 1 CP heroic wasn't just impactful for the combat armies in a variety of ways, but it's very impactful for Tau or trash armies that don't necessarily have combat units. And because of that, you want to pull off these plays to get the extra mobility, like most modern armies. Most of the top armies are using the charge phase in very important ways. Tau don't use it quite that powerfully. The one way that you do this is with a Kroot-centric army with a lot of rampagers and just bodies up the table, a very jail-oriented approach. This style was the best way to play Tau win rate-wise in the previous meta, and it's only getting better with the loss of challenger cards, so I expect to see a further shift from the Tau players to trying out this style. I think it is quite strong. I think you can still play Kalyan, Monka. Riptides gain a quite significant boost to go up to strength 10 when they overcharge, which is not negligible. That's very impactful. Riptides are a mainstay in the list that I like to run. But I think players who really prefer mostly Tau units and not really many auxiliaries are going to roughly be sitting in a similar place. You do a bit more damage when your opponent exposes resources, which is great, but lack of damage output really isn't Tau's, weakness. It's controlling primary and it's attacking staging points. And the best way to do that is using the jail approach, which is very Kroot-centric. So if you're not a fan of those models, we're not really seeing a lot of lists doing that, and we haven't seen them really winning big super majors yet, but I expect them to perform best win rate-wise because they solve the two problems Tau fundamentally have. And I think because Tau has those two problems, controlling primary is very difficult, and also attacking staging points is difficult, they really are kind of at the mercy of fast combat armies. It's not that easy to play against them, and I think they fit more in the C tier. It's the opponents have more leverage and more agency against Tau than you realistically want.
Yeah. And I think a real part of this is that, as you described, that best play style probably is the Kroot jail style. And realistically, those are not very cheap models that, one, most Tau players don't own a ton of. Two, I don't know if all Tau players want to own that. A lot of Tau players play Tau because they like mecha suits with guns, not because of the Kroot part. And so for most players, that may not appeal to them as much because it's not the main faction identity. It's very much the side aspect. And then this is just unfortunate timing. Third is that the Kroot units were awful when the Codex came out. Now they're better now and they're even fine now, but they were most affordable when the Codex came out. You could buy multiple of the start collecting boxes and get all the Rampagers. And no one did that because you didn't need it. You needed a zero. All right, fine. You needed a zero Kroot Rampagers when they came out. But now that you need them, now is when they are now like, oh, I have to pay retail for this? This is a lot of Kroot to buy.
Yeah, it's completely different, and it doesn't benefit from the army rule. There's anti-synergy there, so it's tough.
Yeah, and I find that 40k players will spend the money to go buy 6 of a box for the broken army. They don't want to do it to go from bad to mediocre. And so I think that's been a real obstacle for Tau, just in the perception and the actual results. Is just that the best way to play Tau is not the most accessible way to play Tau. And so I think as time goes on and more people buy into that, it will get better by itself. And then also this Riptide change has been nice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, they've been getting quality of life changes, but they haven't been like huge changes to, points decreases are nice on some damage dealers, but me having 3 more broadsides in a list isn't really moving the needle in the way that I need it to. I am killing pretty much everything in line of sight with Tau. That's not the problem. It's safely attacking where the enemy is, and it's trying to find a way to hold down my primary, which is not easy against control armies.
No, it's not. It's not. The final army to talk about now is World Eaters. So, World Eaters got some loving.
A lot of loving.
World Eaters were in an interesting spot. They were actually starting towards the end of the meta, especially after we saw the Knights changes. They were starting to become an army that was actually performing very well at events. They weren't crazy on win rate or representation, but they were becoming more popular, and we started to see a lot of World Eaters playing top table games and winning a couple of tournaments. The Codex didn't land with much fanfare because it came out, around the same time as like Death Guard. And so instead, we see that this is an army that's getting better as players play with it more, and now it's gotten a buff. It got some points and nerfs that were real insignificant. Karn the Betrayer, Chaos Spawn, Forge Fiends, these are good units that you were taking, all went up a not insignificant amount. But then we see one fundamental change, which is Exalted 8-pound to get a points decrease and a damage buff on the datasheet, and that suddenly introduces a new way for World Eaters to play, because you now have the ultimate damage hammer that you kind of expect from World Eaters, but you would occasionally in the Codex run into the problem of, I don't actually have a unit that really kills a knight like that. Like, it could, but does it actually? Not reliable. Yeah, and if you're wrong, the game ends. And now, no, we do have a unit that kills a knight. It's a deep strike unit. It can rapid ingress. It can attach a character, and it will hit hard enough to matter. And that's a game changer for World Leaders. You put a pretty nice buff on them. I think that the nerfs to the meta and the changed Challenger card have been generally favorable for them. And so we see a solid army get a small nerf and a reasonable buff. I think that's a net small increase. And I think the meta has changed favorably, net small increase. And you got to say, oh, this army was actually fine before, and I think it's a little bit better, and I think it's a little bit better. And at a certain point, if it's fine and then it gets better, it's got to be good.
Yeah, and I genuinely believe that World Leaders are one of the better armies in the game. They have more tools than they had previously. They still can run Forge Fiends. They weren't removed. They didn't take the rule away and make them useless. They can still have guns. They can still have good skirmishers. And then they have some big supreme damage pieces now. I think they're very well-rounded, and I think they fit very nicely into A tier.
They do indeed. I agree completely. One of the most interesting things as we look at this final tier list is that we have no factions in S tier and one faction in D tier. And there's always a couple more armies in C than we'd like to see. And there's always a few armies in A, but generally more armies in A than in C means to me that more than half of the game is in a good spot. I'd say most of the game is in a good spot. Even a couple of the armies that we put in C tier, I can really genuinely see arguments for them winning a tournament. I can really see Dark Angels still winning a tournament. I don't think that they're great, but I think I could win GT with Dark Angels. I think other people can too. I'm not going to be surprised. Tyranids as well. There's a few in there that I still believe have every capability of punching up. And I don't think, as I'm looking at this, that we've got one army that's the problem. I really think that we need to roll up our sleeves, scrap a little bit, play some Honest Warhammer with a lot of people. I don't think I need to build my list specifically to crush Eldar. I don't think that the world is going to end because of 20-man boys attached to Gaz not in a battle wagon. I really think that we've got some very diverse options ahead of us. A lot of armies feel like they are in position to play Warhammer.
And this is, frankly, if you look at this is the closest the meta has ever been. And honestly, I'm super excited to be playing games. I'm really excited for Worlds and what that meta is going to look like. And I think the only thing that could disrupt this is a new Iron Hands Codex, right, John?
I can't wait.
All right, well, that is our tier list there. Let us know if you agree with us, disagree with us. Once again, these rankings are very much predictive from our perspective. This is based on the games that we played, what we've been discussing between ourselves as a team. It is not a prescription to say that this is the correct way. This is exactly how the meta is going to align. So I already know those comments are going to happen. That's not what this is about. It's a discussion starter. And we love to hear what your opinions are. Please let us know in the comments below what you disagree with, what you agree with, and where you think your faction lies. We'd love to hear from you. In addition, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell your friends about us. All of that massively helps us grow. And if you want to see more content related to the balanced data slate with the new list being played, we've mentioned a lot of new archetypes and a lot of new detachments. Check out the War Room at thewarroom.vhx.tv. There's a 3-day free trial, and on top of getting access to content for every faction in the game, you're also going to access our international Discord community that has channels for all the armies. We've got experts in all of them that are constantly talking about the new ideas. So this is the best time to be playing 40K. The meta is hype right now. It's pretty much as close as it's ever been, frankly. There's a couple armies just towards the bottom. There's nothing, in my opinion, that's beyond the scope of the game. And so if you were a little bit nervous about playing tournaments a couple months ago because of the state of the meta, come on back. This is going to be a great time to play. There's a lot of big tournaments coming up, and we hope to see you out there in the tournament scene. We'd love to meet you and say hello. So thank you so much for joining us. John, any final words from you?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. We will see you all next time. See you in the comments.
Bye-bye.